Before the Titans waged their legendary war against the Olympian gods, before Zeus hurled his thunderbolts and Kronos devoured his children, the universe itself had to come into being through a series of primordial births and cosmic unions that would establish the fundamental structure of existence. The story of the Titanomachy cannot be understood without first examining these earliest moments of creation, when the very concepts of earth, sky, darkness and love emerged from the primordial void to shape the cosmos that would later witness the greatest conflict in mythological history. In the beginning, there existed only chaos, not the disorder we might imagine today, but rather a yawning void, an infinite gap or chasm that represented the complete absence of form, structure, or meaning. Ancient Greek sources, particularly Hesiod's Theogony, composed in the 8th century BC, describe chaos not as a deity but as a state of existence, or perhaps more accurately, a state of non-existence that preceded all things. This primordial emptiness contained within itself the potential for everything that would follow, yet it remained utterly formless and without boundary or definition. From this chaos emerged the first primordial deities, beings who embodied fundamental aspects of existence itself. These were not anthropomorphic gods in the manner of later Olympians, but rather personifications of cosmic principles that would govern the universe. The first to emerge was Gaia, the Earth herself, who represented not merely the physical planet, but the principle of fertility, stability, and maternal nurturing that would become the foundation for all life. Gaia possessed a consciousness and will, yet her form encompassed the entirety of the terrestrial realm. Every mountain, valley, forest, and plain existed as part of her divine body. Simultaneously with Gaia's emergence came Tartarus, the deepest and most terrifying region of the underworld. Unlike later conceptions that would place Tartarus beneath the earth, this primordial entity existed as a fundamental cosmic principle, the abyss that lay as far below the earth as the heavens stretched above it. Tartarus represented not merely a place of punishment, but the concept of ultimate depth, of imprisonment so complete that escape became impossible. His realm would later serve as the prison for the most dangerous enemies of cosmic order. But in these earliest moments, he simply existed as the embodiment of the deepest, darkest places in creation. The third primordial force to emerge was Eros, though this was not the cherubic love god of later Roman mythology. This primordial Eros represented the fundamental force of attraction and generation that would drive all future creation and reproduction. Without Eros, the universe would have remained static and lifeless. This cosmic principle of love and desire served as the engine that would motivate the unions between deities, the birth of new generations, and the complex relationships that would eventually lead to the Great War between Titans and Olympians. Following these three came Erebus, the personification of primordial darkness, and his sister Nyx, who embodied the concept of night. Erebus represented the deep darkness that existed before light was created, while Nyx controlled the cyclical darkness that would regularly blanket the world. These two primordial beings immediately demonstrated the generative power of Eros by uniting with each other, producing ether and hemera. This first divine union established the fundamental cycle of light and darkness that would govern the cosmos, creating the temporal framework within which all future events, including the Titanomachy, would unfold. With these basic cosmic principles established, Gaia began the next phase of creation through an extraordinary act of self-fertilization. Drawing upon her own divine essence and the generative force represented by Eros, she gave birth to three fundamental features of the cosmic landscape. First came Uranus, the sky, who stretched across the heavens as her equal and opposite. Where Gaia represented the solid, nurturing foundation of existence, Uranus embodied the vast, encompassing dome of the heavens that covered and protected the earth below. His form extended across the entire celestial sphere, studded with stars and serving as the source of rain and celestial phenomena. Gaia also brought forth the mountains, not as mere geographical features, but as divine beings in their own right. These towering peaks served as the pillars that supported the sky and the dwelling places for various nature spirits and minor deities. Each mountain possessed its own consciousness and divine essence, contributing to the complex spiritual landscape that characterized the ancient Greek understanding of the natural world. The mountains served as intermediaries between earth and sky, their peaks touching Uranus while their foundations remained firmly rooted in Gaia's body. The third offspring of Gaia's self-fertilization was Pontus, the primordial sea. Unlike later sea gods such as Poseidon, who would rule over the waters, Pontus represented the sea itself in its most fundamental form. His waters surrounded the earth disk of Gaia, providing both a boundary and a source of life. Pontus embodied the mysterious, ever-changing nature of the sea, sometimes calm and nurturing, sometimes violent and destructive, but always essential to the cosmic order. Having established these fundamental cosmic features, Gaia then entered into union with Uranus, her sky-born son, in a relationship that would produce the first generation of truly powerful divine beings. This union between earth and sky created the perfect conditions for generation, as the fertile earth received the life-giving rains and celestial influences from the heavens above. Their coupling was not a single event, but an ongoing cosmic process that would continue to shape the universe through their offspring. The first children born from this union were the 12 Titans, 6 male and 6 female, who represented various aspects of cosmic order and natural phenomena. The male Titans included Oceanus, who personified the great river that encircled the world; Coeus, associated with the axis of heaven around which the constellations revolved; Creus, connected with the constellation of the Ram and the measurement of time; Hyperion, who embodied the light of the sun; Iapetus, associated with mortality and the human lifespan; and Kronos, the youngest, who would become the leader of the Titans and the central figure in their eventual war against Zeus. The female Titans, known as Titanides, included Theia, who represented the divine light that gave precious metals and gems their brilliance; Rhea, who embodied the flow of time and generations; Themis, the personification of the divine law and proper custom; Mnemosyne, who represented memory and remembrance; Phoebe, associated with prophetic wisdom and the oracle; and Tethys, who personified the nourishing flow of fresh water that fed rivers and springs. These 12 Titans possessed forms that were recognizably anthropomorphic, yet retained cosmic proportions and divine attributes that set them apart from later generations of gods. They stood as tall as mountains, their bodies radiating divine light, and their voices could shake the foundations of the earth when they spoke. Each Titan embodied specific aspects of cosmic order, while maintaining the raw primordial power inherited from their parents. Following the birth of the Titans, Gaia and Uranus produced 3 more sons, who would play crucial roles in the coming conflict: the Cyclops. These were not the savage, one-eyed giants of later folklore, but skilled divine craftsmen whose single eye blazed with the fire of creation itself. The 3 Cyclops, Brontes, Steropus, and Arges, possessed the knowledge and ability to forge weapons of unimaginable power. Their muscular bodies stood twice the height of the Titans, and their single eyes could see into the heart of metals and stones, understanding their hidden properties and potential. The final offspring of Gaia and Uranus were perhaps the most terrifying, the 3 Hekatonchires, or 100-handed ones. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges possessed 50 heads each and 100 arms, making them living embodiments of overwhelming force and chaos. Their multiple heads allowed them to think and perceive on levels incomprehensible to other beings, while their 100 hands could hurl rocks and boulders with devastating effect. Each hecatoncheira stood larger than even the Cyclopes, their massive forms capable of shaking the earth with their movements. The appearance of these monstrous yet divine children filled Uranus with a deep, consuming horror. Unlike the Titans, who maintained forms that, while cosmic in scale, remained recognizably divine and beautiful, the Cyclops and hecatoncheiras represented aspects of creation that Uranus found fundamentally disturbing. Their raw power threatened the ordered cosmos he sought to maintain, while their alien appearances challenged his conception of proper divine form. Uranus's fear transformed into active hatred as he contemplated the potential threat these children represented. The Cyclops, with their ability to forge weapons of divine power, could potentially create arms capable of challenging his supremacy. The hecatoncheiras, with their overwhelming physical might and alien intelligence, represented a force of chaos that could unravel the cosmic order he had helped establish. Rather than accept these children as legitimate offspring, Uranus began to view them as abominations that threatened the stability of creation itself. Acting on this fear and hatred, Uranus made a decision that would ultimately lead to his downfall and set in motion the events that would culminate in the Titanomachy. He seized the Cyclopes and hecatoncheiras and cast them down into the depths of Tartarus, the primordial abyss that had emerged alongside Gaia from chaos. This imprisonment was not merely physical, but represented a fundamental rejection of these aspects of creation, an attempt to deny their right to exist in the ordered cosmos. The descent into Tartarus was a journey of unimaginable horror for the imprisoned children. They fell through layers of darkness so complete that even their divine sight could not penetrate it, passing through regions where the very concept of space began to break down. Tartarus itself welcomed them not as a conscious choice, but as an inevitable consequence of Uranus's rejection. The abyss served as the repository for everything the cosmos sought to exclude from itself. Within Tartarus, the Cyclops and hecatoncheiras found themselves bound by chains forged from the fundamental forces of the cosmos itself. These were not mere physical restraints, but bonds that prevented them from exercising their divine powers or influencing the world above. The Cyclopes could no longer forge their miraculous weapons, while the hecatoncheiras found their 100 hands useless against bonds that drew their strength from the very structure of reality. This act of imprisonment created the first great injustice in the cosmic order, establishing a precedent for the abuse of power that would characterize Uranus's reign and eventually lead to his overthrow. More immediately, it caused tremendous pain to Gaia, who felt the anguish of her imprisoned children as a constant torment within her own divine essence. The earth itself began to reflect this suffering, as Gaia's distress manifested in earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and other geological disturbances that served as expressions of her maternal grief and growing anger toward her consort. The suffering of Gaia reached a crescendo that shook the very foundations of creation, as her imprisoned children languished in the depths of Tartarus. Each day brought fresh anguish, as she felt their pain echoing through the cosmic bonds that connected all her offspring to her divine essence. The Cyclopes, once capable of forging wonders that could illuminate the darkest corners of existence, now sat in chains that prevented them from so much as sparking the smallest flame. The hecatoncheiras, whose 100 hands had possessed the strength to reshape mountains, found themselves unable to move even a single finger against their cosmic bonds. This maternal torment manifested throughout Gaia's earthly form in increasingly violent ways. Volcanic eruptions split open her surface as expressions of her rage, while earthquakes sent tremors through every continent as she writhed in anguish. Rivers changed their courses overnight, mountains crumbled without warning, and the very ground beneath the feet of mortals and immortals alike became unreliable. Yet Uranus remained unmoved by his consort's suffering, viewing her distress as an acceptable price for maintaining what he considered cosmic order. The Sky Father's indifference to Gaia's pain only intensified her determination to free her imprisoned children. She began to contemplate methods of challenging Uranus's authority, but the task seemed impossible given his position as ruler of the heavens and his control over the celestial forces. Uranus commanded the winds, the rains, and the movement of the stars themselves. His body stretched across the entire dome of the sky, making him effectively omnipresent above the earth. Any direct assault would require approaching him through his own domain, where his power remained absolute. Gaia's divine intellect, sharpened by millennia of creative force and maternal wisdom, began to devise a plan that would exploit the one weakness inherent in Uranus's dominance. The Skyfather's power derived from his position above the earth, but this same position required him to descend to Gaia's surface for their regular unions. During these moments of intimate connection, when Uranus lowered himself to embrace the earth, he became vulnerable in ways that his elevated position normally prevented. The Earth Mother began to gather the raw materials necessary for her plan, drawing upon the deepest and most powerful substances within her divine form. From the adamantine core of her being, she extracted a metal unlike any that had existed before. This adamantine possessed properties that transcended ordinary matter. It could cut through divine flesh as easily as mortal steel sliced through cloth, and it held an edge that would never dull regardless of what it encountered. The metal itself seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a substance that appeared to be forged from crystallized darkness. Working with the focused intensity that only a mother's desperation could provide, Gaia shaped this adamantine into a weapon specifically designed for her purpose. The sickle she created possessed a curved blade that measured the length of a giant's arm, its edge honed to a sharpness that could separate atoms from their bonds. The handle, crafted from the same adamantine material, provided perfect balance and grip, ensuring that whoever wielded it would have complete control over its devastating power. Along the blade's surface, Gaia inscribed symbols that channeled her own divine essence, making the weapon an extension of her will and fury. The completed sickle radiated an aura of menace that made even Gaia herself recoil slightly from her creation. This was not merely a tool but a weapon of cosmic justice, designed to right the fundamental wrong that Uranus had committed against their children. The blade seemed to hunger for the purpose for which it had been forged, its dark surface rippling with barely contained energy that would soon taste divine blood for the first time in the history of creation. With her weapon prepared, Gaia faced the challenge of finding someone willing and capable of wielding it against Uranus. The task would require not only tremendous courage, but also the strength to strike at the moment of greatest vulnerability. The wielder would need to approach close enough to Uranus to deliver a devastating blow, while the Skyfather was focused on his union with Gaia, a moment when his attention would be completely absorbed by their cosmic coupling. Gaia summoned all 12 of her Titan children to a secret gathering in a hidden valley, where the earth formed natural amphitheatre walls that would prevent their words from reaching Uranus's ever-listening ears. The assembled Titans created an impressive sight as they arranged themselves in a circle around their mother. Each stood several times taller than the mountains that surrounded them, their divine forms radiating the elemental powers they embodied. Oceanus appeared with water constantly flowing around his feet, while Hyperion's presence caused the very air to shimmer with contained sunlight. The Earth Mother revealed her adamantine sickle to her assembled children, explaining the desperate plan she had conceived to free their imprisoned brothers. She described the weapon's capabilities and the narrow window of opportunity that would present itself during her next union with Uranus. The task would require one of them to hide within her earthly form, concealed until the crucial moment when Uranus descended to embrace her. At that instant, the chosen Titan would emerge and strike with the sickle, severing the Skyfather's connection to his power source. The response from the Titans revealed the magnitude of what Gaia was asking. Oceanus, eldest of the males, stepped back from the sickle as if it were a venomous serpent, his flowing waters recoiling from its dark emanations. Cronus, master of the celestial axis, shook his head slowly, explaining that striking their father would upset the fundamental balance of the cosmos in ways that might prove irreversible. Crea spoke of the temporal consequences, warning that such an act would create ripples through time that could affect the fate of all future generations. One by one, the older Titans declined to take up the weapon, each offering different reasons, but all ultimately driven by the same fundamental fear of patricide and its consequences. Hyperion worried about the effect on solar light if Uranus's celestial authority was disrupted. Iapetus spoke of the moral implications of children striking against their father, regardless of his crimes. Even the female Titans, despite their sympathy for Gaia's suffering and their own concern for their imprisoned brothers, hesitated to endorse such a radical solution. The reluctance of his siblings only strengthened the resolve that had been building within Cronus, the youngest of the Titans. Unlike his brothers, who had lived longer under Uranus's rule and had grown accustomed to accepting their father's authority, Cronus possessed the rebellious spirit of youth combined with a keen intelligence that saw through the justifications for accepting injustice. His form, while smaller than some of his brothers, radiated an intensity that made up for any difference in physical size. His eyes held a calculating gleam that spoke of ambitions extending far beyond the immediate crisis. Cronus stepped forward and grasped the adamantine sickle without hesitation, feeling its weight settle perfectly in his divine hands, as if the weapon had been forged specifically for him. The dark metal seemed to recognize a kindred spirit, its surface warming slightly at his touch, while remaining cold as winter stone to everyone else. The youngest Titan looked around at his assembled family, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had already made an irrevocable decision. He accepted the task not merely out of filial duty to his mother or sympathy for his imprisoned brothers, but because he recognized the opportunity that Gaia's plan represented. Overthrowing Uranus would not simply free the Cyclops and Hecatonchires, it would create a power vacuum that a capable and ambitious Titan could fill. Cronus had long chafed under his father's arbitrary rule, and had observed the inefficiencies and injustices that characterized Uranus's reign. He possessed his own vision for how the cosmos should be governed, one that would elevate the Titans to their proper place as rulers of creation. The plan required careful timing and perfect coordination between mother and son. Gaia would need to conceal Cronus within her earthly form without alerting Uranus to the deception, while Cronus would have to remain perfectly still and silent until the moment for action arrived. The hiding place Gaia prepared for her youngest son lay deep within a mountain that she temporarily hollowed out, creating a chamber just large enough to contain his divine form while leaving him positioned to emerge at the critical moment. When Uranus next descended for his regular union with Gaia, he noticed nothing unusual about the Earth's appearance or behaviour. The Sky Father's attention focused entirely on the cosmic coupling that maintained the cycle of generation and renewal throughout creation. His vast form settled across the Earth's surface, his celestial essence mingling with Gaia's terrestrial power in the same pattern that had been repeated countless times since the early days of creation. At the moment of deepest union, when Uranus was most vulnerable and least aware of potential threats, Cronus burst forth from his concealment with the adamantine sickle raised high. The youngest Titan's divine strength, enhanced by righteous fury and ambition, drove the blade forward with precision that would have impressed even the imprisoned Cyclopes. The sickle's edge, sharpened beyond mortal comprehension and empowered by Gaia's own essence, met no resistance as it sliced through divine flesh that had never before known the touch of violence. The castration of Uranus created a wound that transcended the merely physical, striking at the very core of his cosmic authority and severing his connection to the generative forces that had made him ruler of the heavens. The Sky Father's scream of agony and rage echoed across all creation, causing stars to dim and the aurora to flicker as his pain disrupted the celestial order he had maintained. His severed genitals fell toward the earth, trailing divine ichor that sparkled like liquid starlight as it descended through the atmosphere. The impact of the severed organs with the Mediterranean Sea created a disturbance that sent waves crashing against every shore as the divine essence mixed with the salt water. The sea began to foam and churn with unprecedented violence, its surface covered with a white froth that seemed to glow with its own inner light. This foam possessed properties unlike anything that had existed before, containing within it the concentrated creative and generative power that had once been Uranus's exclusive domain. From this divine foam, stirred by the waves and energized by the Sky Father's essence, emerged a new goddess whose beauty surpassed that of any being yet born into creation. Aphrodite rose from the sea fully formed, her divine body perfect in every proportion and radiating an allure that would prove irresistible to gods and mortals alike. Her golden hair flowed like liquid sunlight, while her eyes held depths that reflected both the passion of love and the power of creation itself. The goddess of love and beauty had been born from an act of violence, a paradox that would characterize her nature throughout all future ages. Aphrodite's emergence from the sea foam marked the transformation of Uranus's generative power into a new form, one that would influence creation through attraction and desire rather than through patriarchal dominance. The new goddess possessed authority over the forces that drew beings together, the passions that inspired creation, and the beauty that elevated the mundane world toward divine perfection. Her birth represented both an ending and a beginning, the conclusion of Uranus's absolute rule and the dawn of a new cosmic order. Meanwhile, Uranus himself, grievously wounded and stripped of his most fundamental power, retreated to the farthest reaches of the sky where his diminished form could no longer exert direct control over earthly affairs. The Sky Father's reign had ended not through natural succession, but through violent overthrow, establishing a precedent that would haunt future generations of divine rulers. His withdrawal from active governance created the power vacuum that Cronus had anticipated and prepared himself to fill. The youngest Titan wasted no time in asserting his authority over his siblings and claiming the throne that Uranus had abandoned. Cronus's successful patricide had demonstrated both his courage and his ruthlessness, qualities that commanded respect even from those who might have preferred a different outcome. The other Titans, faced with the reality of their father's defeat and their brother's obvious ambition, chose to acknowledge Kronos as their new leader rather than risk civil war among themselves. Kronos' first act as ruler was to fulfill the promise that had motivated his rebellion by freeing the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires from their imprisonment in Tartarus. The journey to the primordial abyss required descending through layers of reality that few beings had ever experienced, passing through regions where the normal laws of physics began to break down and approaching the very foundations of existence itself. The new Titan King's divine nature allowed him to survive the journey, though even he felt the oppressive weight of Tartarus pressing against his consciousness. The freed prisoners emerged from their cosmic prison changed by their long captivity, but grateful for their liberation. The Cyclops, their single eyes blazing with renewed creative fire, immediately offered their services to Kronos as master craftsmen and weaponsmiths. The Hecatonchires, their 100 hands flexing with joy at their regained freedom, pledged their overwhelming strength to support the new cosmic order. These powerful allies would prove invaluable to Kronos in the years to come, though their loyalty would eventually become a crucial factor in his own downfall. With his power base secured and his authority acknowledged, Kronos established what would later be remembered as the Golden Age of divine rule. Unlike his father's arbitrary and often cruel governance, the youngest Titan implemented a system of cosmic order based on natural law and mutual cooperation. The earth flourished under his guidance as Gaia's suffering ended, and her creative energies were channeled toward nurturing rather than rebellion. Crops grew without cultivation, rivers ran clear and sweet, and the climate remained perpetually mild and pleasant. The Golden Age represented humanity's first glimpse of paradise, though mortals themselves were still crude and simple compared to later generations. They lived without the need for agriculture or complex technology, gathering their sustenance from trees that bore fruit year-round and drinking from springs that never ran dry. Disease and premature death were unknown, while conflict between individuals remained rare and minor. The world itself seemed to cooperate with its inhabitants, providing everything necessary for a peaceful and abundant existence. Cronus ruled this golden realm from a palace that he constructed atop the highest mountain, its adamantine walls reflecting the same dark gleam as the sickle that had won him his throne. The structure served both as a residence and as a symbol of his authority, visible from every corner of the earth and radiating the power that maintained cosmic order. Within its halls, the Titan King held court with his siblings and received the homage of lesser divine beings who had accepted the new order. The success of Cronus's reign led naturally to his union with Rhea, his sister, and the Titaness who embodied the flow of time and the succession of generations. Their marriage represented more than a personal alliance. It symbolized the joining of temporal authority with the natural progression of ages, creating a partnership that seemed destined to rule for eternity. Rhea's beauty complemented Cronus's strength, while her wisdom in matters of time and generation balanced his focus on immediate power and control. The wedding celebration of Cronus and Rhea lasted for a full year, with divine beings from across creation gathering to witness the union of the new cosmic rulers. The ceremony itself took place at the centre of the world, where earth met sky and the fundamental forces of creation converged. Gaia herself blessed the union, grateful for her son's role in ending her suffering and hopeful that his reign would bring lasting peace to creation. The other Titans participated as witnesses and supporters, their presence lending legitimacy to Cronus's assumption of supreme authority. However, even as the Golden Age flourished and Cronus's rule brought unprecedented prosperity to creation, the seeds of future conflict were already beginning to germinate. The same pattern that had led to Uranus's downfall, a father's fear of being overthrown by his children, would soon begin to manifest in the new Titan King's own consciousness. The cycle of generational conflict that had begun with the castration of Uranus was far from complete, and the very success of Cronus's reign would eventually create the conditions for his own destruction. The prophecy that would drive Cronus to desperate measures came from an unexpected source. Gaia, despite her gratitude for her son's liberation of the Cyclops and Hecatan Chires, possessed the gift of foresight that allowed her to perceive the patterns woven into the fabric of fate itself. Her prophetic vision revealed a truth that would shatter the peace of the Golden Age and set in motion the events that would culminate in the Great War between Titans and Olympians. The prophecy that shattered Cronus's confidence came to him through Gaia herself, delivered during what should have been a moment of celebration. The Earth Mother had summoned her son to the sacred grove where the first olive tree had sprouted, its silver-green leaves rustling with divine whispers that carried messages from the deepest currents of fate. Gaia's massive form, still bearing the scars from her earlier anguish, materialized from the living rock and soil as she prepared to share knowledge that would transform the Golden Age's prosperity into something far darker. The prophecy spoke of a pattern woven into the very fabric of existence. Just as Cronus had overthrown Uranus, so too would one of his own children rise to challenge his authority and claim the throne of cosmic rulership. The words carried the weight of absolute certainty, describing not merely a possibility, but an inevitable future that no amount of power or wisdom could prevent. Gaia's voice, usually warm with maternal affection when addressing her youngest son, now carried the cold finality of fate itself as she revealed the destiny that awaited him. Cronus received this revelation while standing in his full divine glory, his form radiating the authority that had made him master of creation. His body, proportioned like that of a perfectly formed human but scaled to cosmic dimensions, towered above even the tallest mountains. His skin possessed the golden hue of ripened grain, reflecting his dominion over the earth's abundance, while his eyes held the deep amber colour of honey mixed with liquid sunlight. The adamantine sickle that had won him his throne hung at his side, its dark surface still bearing traces of his father's divine ichor. The Titan King's initial reaction to the prophecy combined disbelief with rising anger. He had overthrown Uranus not out of mere ambition, but to correct the injustices of his father's rule and establish a more equitable cosmic order. The golden age that flourished under his guidance proved the wisdom of his actions. Mortals lived in peace and abundance, the earth produced its bounty without coercion, and even the weather patterns remained mild and beneficial. How could such benevolent rule possibly generate the conditions for rebellion? Yet as Cronus contemplated Gaia's words, the logic of the prophecy began to reveal itself with uncomfortable clarity. His own rebellion had succeeded precisely because Uranus's rule, despite its external stability, had contained fundamental flaws that created the motivation for overthrow. The Sky Father's imprisonment of the Cyclops and Hecaton Chires had demonstrated a willingness to sacrifice family bonds for perceived security, while his indifference to Gaia's suffering had shown a lack of empathy that ultimately undermined his authority. The realization that he might follow the same pattern as his father filled Cronus with a growing paranoia that would eventually consume his better nature entirely. He began to scrutinize every aspect of his rule, searching for potential sources of future rebellion, while simultaneously trying to identify which of his future children might pose the prophesied threat. This internal conflict between his desire to maintain the Golden Age's prosperity and his need to protect his throne would gradually transform the benevolent ruler into something far more sinister. The change in Cronus's character became apparent to Rhea long before it manifested in overt actions. His wife, whose divine nature allowed her to perceive the flow of time and the subtle shifts in cosmic currents, noticed how her husband's conversations increasingly focused on themes of loyalty, security, and the potential for betrayal. Where once he had spoken of building a lasting legacy through wise governance, he now obsessed over methods of preventing challenges to his authority. Rhea's own form embodied the graceful flow of temporal progression. Her body seemed to shimmer with a constant subtle motion that suggested the passage of moments and seasons. Her hair flowed like liquid silver, changing its apparent length and style as different periods of time manifested through her divine essence. Her eyes held depths that reflected not just the present moment but glimpses of past and future, giving her a perspective on events that even other Titans found difficult to comprehend. When Rhea first became pregnant with their initial child, the couple's joy should have represented the natural culmination of their successful union and the promise of continuing their benevolent dynasty. The pregnancy proceeded normally for a divine being, with Rhea's form gradually expanding to accommodate the growing life within her. The child's divine nature manifested even before birth, causing subtle changes in the cosmic order as new powers prepared to enter the world. Hestia, their firstborn daughter, emerged from Rhea's womb as a being of pure divine fire, though not the destructive flames of warfare, but rather the warm, nurturing hearth fire that would make homes sacred and communities possible. Her infant form glowed with a gentle radiance that brought comfort to all who witnessed it, while her presence seemed to stabilize the very air around her. The newborn goddess possessed an inherent understanding of hospitality, family bonds, and the sacred nature of domestic spaces. The moment of Hestia's birth should have filled Cronus with paternal pride and joy at seeing his bloodline continue into a new generation. Instead, the sight of his daughter triggered the paranoid fears that Gaia's prophecy had planted in his mind. This child, beautiful and innocent though she appeared, represented the beginning of the generation that would eventually produce his prophesied overthrower. Every gurgle and movement from the infant seemed to carry the potential for future rebellion. Without allowing himself time for second thoughts or consideration of alternatives, Cronus acted on his paranoid impulses with shocking brutality. His massive hands, which had once wielded the adamantine sickle to liberate the oppressed, now seized his newborn daughter with the same determination he had shown when overthrowing Uranus. Hestia's tiny form disappeared entirely within her father's grasp as he lifted her toward his mouth, which opened to reveal teeth that gleamed like polished marble. The act of consuming his own child represented a violation of natural order so profound that it sent shockwaves through the cosmic fabric itself. Cronus's throat, designed for consuming ambrosia and nectar, now accommodated the living form of his daughter as she passed into his divine digestive system. The process did not kill Hestia. Gods could not be destroyed so easily, but rather trapped her in a state of suspended animation within her father's body, conscious but powerless to escape or communicate with the outside world. Rhea's scream of horror and anguish at witnessing this monstrous act echoed across creation with such intensity that mountains cracked and rivers temporarily reversed their flow. The Titaness had expected to experience the joy of motherhood, to nurture and guide her daughter's development into full divine maturity. Instead, she watched helplessly as her husband transformed from loving partner into child-devouring monster in the space of a few terrible moments. The consumption of Hestia established a pattern that would repeat with each subsequent birth, creating a cycle of hope followed by devastating loss that gradually destroyed Rhea's sanity and filled her with a hatred for her husband that burned hotter than solar fire. Each pregnancy brought the natural maternal expectation that this time might be different, that Kronos might overcome his paranoid fears and allow their child to live. Each birth brought the same horrific reality as the Titan King's paranoia, proved stronger than any parental instinct. Demeter, their second daughter, emerged as a goddess of agriculture and the harvest, her infant form surrounded by the sweet scent of growing grain and the promise of abundant crops. Her divine nature manifested in the way plants seemed to grow more vigorously in her presence, while her touch could cause flowers to bloom even in winter. The newborn's connection to the earth's fertility should have been seen as a blessing that would enhance the Golden Age's prosperity. Instead, Kronos saw only another potential threat to his reign. Demeter's agricultural powers could theoretically be turned against him, withholding food from his supporters or creating abundance for his enemies. The infant's connection to Gaia might also provide a channel for his mother's influence, potentially turning his own daughter into an agent of rebellion. These paranoid fantasies, born from fear rather than logic, drove him to repeat the same horrific act that had claimed Hestia. Demeter's consumption followed the same pattern as her sister's, though her agricultural nature caused the very ground beneath Kronos' feet to wither temporarily as she disappeared down his throat. The infant goddess joined Hestia in the terrible prison of their father's body, trapped in darkness but unable to die or escape. Their combined presence within Kronos began to create internal pressure that he could feel but chose to ignore, focusing instead on the temporary relief that came from eliminating another potential threat. The birth of Hera, their third daughter, brought with it the promise of a goddess who would embody marriage, family, and the protection of women. The infant's regal bearing was apparent even in her earliest moments, as she gazed around the world with eyes that held an inherent understanding of social order and proper relationships. Her divine aura carried the authority that would one day make her queen of the gods, though that potential remained unrealized as Kronos' paranoia claimed another victim. Hera's consumption proved particularly traumatic for Rhea, because this daughter had shown signs of the wisdom and strength that might have made her a worthy heir to the Titan throne. The infant's brief existence had demonstrated intelligence beyond her apparent age, as if she understood the danger she faced and was preparing to meet it with dignity. Her disappearance into Kronos' maw represented not just another personal loss, but the destruction of leadership potential that the cosmos desperately needed. The pattern continued with the birth of Hades, their first son, whose emergence brought with it an aura of solemnity and deep wisdom that seemed to extend into realms beyond normal perception. The infant's dark eyes held depths that suggested an understanding of mysteries that even other gods found incomprehensible, while his presence seemed to create a zone of perfect silence that spoke of profound contemplation. His divine nature connected him to the hidden aspects of existence, the secrets that lay beneath surface appearances. Kronos' consumption of Hades represented a particularly cruel irony, as this son's natural inclinations toward ruling hidden realms would have made him an unlikely candidate for challenging his father's visible authority. The infant's wisdom might have made him a valuable counselor and ally, helping to strengthen rather than threaten the Titan's reign. Instead, paranoid fear drove Cronus to destroy this potential, adding another divine presence to the growing population of imprisoned children within his body. Poseidon, their second son, arrived with the power of earthquakes and ocean storms already manifesting around his infant form. His birth coincided with unprecedented tidal activity as seas around the world responded to their new lord's emergence into existence. The baby's eyes held the deep blue-green colour of ocean depths, while his presence seemed to make the very air taste of salt spray and carry the sound of distant waves. The infant Poseidon's connection to the sea represented both tremendous power and potential threat in Kronos' paranoid calculations. Control over the oceans could allow a rebellious child to isolate continents, flood coastal regions, or create storms that would disrupt the careful balance of the Golden Age. The baby's earthquake abilities posed an even more direct threat, potentially allowing him to literally shake his father's throne from its foundations. These fears, however irrational when applied to a newborn infant, drove Cronus to consume Poseidon with the same mechanical efficiency that had claimed his siblings. The ocean god's disappearance into his father's throat caused massive tsunamis across the world as the seas reacted to their ruler's imprisonment. Coastal communities that had never known dangerous storms suddenly faced walls of water that reshaped entire shorelines, while deep ocean currents shifted in ways that would affect weather patterns for centuries. Each act of consumption took a greater toll on Rhea's mental and emotional stability. The Titaness found herself caught in an impossible situation. Her divine nature compelled her to continue bearing children as part of the natural cosmic order, yet each birth brought the certainty of loss and the horror of watching her husband devour their offspring. Her form began to show the strain of repeated trauma, her silver hair developing streaks of darker metal that reflected her growing despair. The other Titans watched these events with a mixture of horror and helpless sympathy. None possessed the power to directly challenge Kronos without risking civil war among their generation, yet none could ignore the monstrous transformation of their youngest brother. Oceanus retreated to the farthest reaches of his world-encircling river, unable to bear witnessing the repeated infanticides. Hyperion's solar light grew noticeably dimmer as his joy in creation was overshadowed by the darkness of Kronos' actions. Despite the personal horror of his actions, Kronos' reign continued to maintain the external prosperity that characterized the Golden Age. Mortals still lived in abundance and peace, unaware of the cosmic drama playing out among their divine rulers. Crops continued to grow without cultivation, the climate remained mild and beneficial, and human society developed slowly along peaceful lines that emphasized cooperation over competition. This paradox between public prosperity and private monstrosity created a cognitive dissonance that further destabilized Kronos' mental state. He could point to the continued success of his reign as evidence that his actions were justified, while simultaneously feeling the growing pressure of his imprisoned children within his own body. The 5 young gods trapped in his digestive system remained conscious and aware, the combined divine presence creating an internal tension that manifested as chronic pain and digestive disturbance. The cosmic imbalance created by Kronos' actions began to manifest in subtle ways throughout creation. Natural cycles that had previously operated with perfect regularity started showing minor variations and inconsistencies. The boundaries between seasons became less distinct, while weather patterns occasionally produced phenomena that had never been observed before. These changes remained minor enough to avoid disrupting the Golden Age's overall prosperity, but they served as warnings that the cosmic order was under strain. Gaia herself felt the disturbance most acutely, as the imprisonment of her grandchildren within Kronos' body created a disruption in the natural flow of generational succession. The Earth Mother's prophetic abilities allowed her to perceive the growing instability that would eventually tear apart the current cosmic order, though the exact timing and nature of the coming crisis remained hidden even from her divine perception. The stage was being set for divine intervention on a scale that would dwarf even the overthrow of Uranus. The 5 imprisoned children of Cronus represented a reservoir of divine power and justified anger that would eventually find expression through their prophesied liberator. The cosmic order that had seemed so stable under the Titan's rule was actually balanced on the edge of a precipice, maintained only by the temporary suppression of forces that could not be contained forever. As Rhea approached her 6th pregnancy, the accumulated trauma of watching 5 children disappear into Kronos' throat had transformed the once graceful Titaness into a figure of barely contained desperation and rage. Her silver hair now bore permanent streaks of iron-dark metal that reflected her inner turmoil, while her eyes held depths of maternal fury that made even her fellow Titans uncomfortable. The divine essence that flowed through her form, once smooth as flowing time itself, now moved in jagged patterns that spoke of a consciousness pushed beyond its natural limits. The pregnancy with Zeus differed from the previous 5 in ways that only Rhea initially recognized. The child growing within her womb possessed a divine energy that seemed to actively resist containment, sending pulses of power through her body that felt different from anything she had experienced before. Where her earlier children had developed according to predictable patterns of divine gestation, this 6th child appeared to be consciously preparing for the challenges that awaited him beyond birth. Rhea's desperation drove her to seek counsel from the one being whose wisdom and power might offer an alternative to the horrific pattern that had claimed her previous children. Gaia had withdrawn from regular contact with her family following the repeated atrocities committed by Cronus, but her granddaughter's anguish eventually penetrated the Earth Mother's self-imposed isolation. The meeting between the 2 goddesses took place in a cavern deep within Mount Othrys, where the stone walls themselves wept mineral tears in sympathy with Rhea's suffering. The Earth Mother's form had grown more massive since her last interaction with the family, her divine essence spreading deeper into the planet's core as she sought to distance herself from the surface events that brought her such pain. Her face, carved from living stone and soil, bore expressions of grief that had literally reshaped mountain ranges across the world. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of geological ages and the patient endurance of stone worn smooth by countless storms. Gaia's counsel focused on the practical requirements for saving the prophesied child, whose birth would eventually fulfill the destiny she had revealed to Kronos. The plan they developed required precise timing, absolute secrecy, and the cooperation of divine forces that lay beyond Kronos' immediate sphere of influence. The Earth Mother's knowledge of hidden places and forgotten powers would prove essential to creating a sanctuary where the infant Zeus could develop beyond his father's reach. The deception began with Rhea's careful manipulation of her own divine nature to conceal the true timing of Zeus's birth. Using her mastery over temporal flow, she created subtle distortions in the passage of time around herself that would confuse even Kronos' heightened awareness of his wife's condition. These temporal fluctuations made it appear that the pregnancy was progressing more slowly than its actual pace, buying precious time for the preparations necessary to save their child. Meanwhile, Gaia began preparing the most crucial element of their plan, a substitute that would satisfy Kronos' compulsion to consume his offspring without actually harming the real infant. The Earth Mother drew upon her deepest reserves of creative power to shape a stone that would perfectly mimic the appearance, weight, and even the divine aura of a newborn god. This was not ordinary rock, but a piece of her own essence, carefully crafted to fool even divine senses during the critical moments when Cronus would seize and devour what he believed to be his son. The stone required weeks of careful preparation, with Gaia infusing it with just enough divine energy to register as a living being, while ensuring it contained none of the actual consciousness or power that would characterize the real Zeus. The Earth Mother's skilled hands, capable of shaping continents and ocean floors, worked with microscopic precision to create every detail that would make the deception convincing. The finished product possessed the exact weight and proportions of a divine infant, complete with the subtle warmth and energy signature that would mask its true nature. As Rhea's labour approached, Gaia identified the perfect location for Zeus's actual birth, the Dictaean cave on Mount Dicte in Crete. This cavern extended deep into the mountain's heart, its passages connecting to underground chambers that had never felt sunlight or witnessed the presence of any being save the Earth Mother herself. The cave's isolation from the normal flow of cosmic events would help conceal the tremendous energy release that would accompany the birth of such a powerful divine being. The Dictaean cave possessed natural properties that made it ideal for concealing divine activity from external observation. Its stone walls contained veins of adamantine ore that created a natural barrier against scrying and remote sensing, while the cave's depth placed it beyond the reach of Kronos' atmospheric awareness. The cavern's interior chambers formed a natural amphitheatre, where sound would be contained and absorbed rather than echoing to the surface where it might attract unwanted attention. Gaia also enlisted the aid of the Curates, a group of minor divine beings whose nature connected them to the protection of divine infants and the preservation of cosmic secrets. These warrior spirits possessed forms that combined human appearance with bronze armour that seemed to grow from their very skin. Their faces bore the stern expressions of eternal guardians, while their eyes held the unwavering focus of beings whose entire existence centred on their protective duties. The Curates understood their role in the coming deception without requiring detailed explanation. Their divine nature attuned them to the cosmic significance of Zeus's birth and the necessity of concealing it from Kronos. Each warrior prepared his bronze shield and spear with meticulous care, ensuring that their equipment would produce the maximum amount of noise when the time came to mask the infant's cries. When Rhea's labour finally began, she followed the carefully rehearsed plan that she and Gaia had developed. Using her temporal manipulation abilities, she created a localized distortion that would allow her to travel to Crete and give birth in the Dictaean cave, while maintaining the appearance of remaining in her usual location. This feat required enormous concentration and energy expenditure, but her maternal desperation provided the motivation necessary to accomplish what would normally be impossible, even for a Titaness. The journey to Crete took place outside normal time and space, with Rhea's consciousness effectively existing in two locations simultaneously, while her physical form made the transition to the hidden cave. The strain of maintaining this dual existence caused her divine essence to fluctuate in ways that created minor earthquakes and temporal anomalies across the world, though these disturbances remained subtle enough to avoid attracting Kronos' attention. Within the Dictaean cave, surrounded by Gaia's protective presence and the watchful Curates, Rhea finally experienced childbirth without the certainty of immediate loss that had characterized her previous 5 deliveries. The cave's walls seemed to pulse with sympathetic energy, as the Earth Mother channeled her own strength to support her granddaughter through the intense process of bringing a god of Zeus's magnitude into existence. The infant Zeus emerged from his mother's womb with divine power already radiating from his tiny form, in ways that surpassed even his siblings' early manifestations. His eyes, when they first opened, held depths of intelligence and determination that seemed inappropriate for a newborn but perfectly suited to the cosmic role he was destined to fulfill. His infant body glowed with a subtle golden light that spoke of solar authority, while the air around him crackled with barely contained electrical energy that would one day manifest as his signature thunderbolts. The moment of Zeus's birth created energy fluctuations so intense that they threatened to reveal the location despite all precautions taken to conceal it. The infant's first cry possessed the power of a storm wind, while his movements generated small lightning discharges that illuminated the cave's interior with brilliant flashes. These manifestations of divine power required immediate suppression to maintain the secrecy essential to the plan's success. The Curetes immediately sprang into action, implementing the noise-masking strategy that Gaia had devised. Their bronze shields clashed together with tremendous force, creating a cacophony that drowned out Zeus's infant cries and the energy discharges accompanying his movements. The warrior spirits maintained this protective din with mechanical precision, their bronze armour ringing like temple bells as they danced their ancient war dance around the newborn god. The sound of clashing bronze served multiple purposes beyond simply masking Zeus's presence. The rhythmic nature of the Curetes' dance created a hypnotic effect that helped calm the infant's divine energy, while the metallic resonance established a protective barrier that would deflect casual divine observation. Any god attempting to scry the area would encounter only the sound of martial practice, a common enough occurrence that would attract no special attention. While the Curetes maintained their protective performance, Gaia carefully wrapped the substitute stone in swaddling clothes that Rhea had prepared for this moment. The Earth Mother's skilled touch ensured that every fold of cloth fell naturally, creating the exact appearance that Cronus would expect when presented with his newborn son. The stone's weight and proportions matched those of the real infant so precisely that only direct divine inspection would reveal the deception. Rhea's return journey to her usual location required the same temporal manipulation that had enabled her departure, though the strain of childbirth made maintaining the dual existence even more challenging. Her divine essence flickered between dimensions as she struggled to complete the transition, while carrying the wrapped stone that would serve as Zeus's substitute. The effort required to accomplish this feat left her temporarily weakened but filled with a fierce joy that she'd not experienced since Hestia's birth. The presentation of the false infant to Kronos proceeded exactly as the previous 5 occasions, with the Titan King's paranoid compulsions overriding any parental instincts that might have prompted closer examination of his supposed son. The wrapped stone felt appropriately warm and heavy in his massive hands, while Gaia's careful craftsmanship ensured that it radiated just enough divine energy to satisfy his expectations of a newborn god's presence. Kronos' consumption of the stone occurred with the same mechanical efficiency that had characterized his previous acts of infanticide. The substitute passed down his throat without triggering any recognition of its true nature, joining the 5 genuine children already imprisoned within his divine digestive system. The stone's presence among his living offspring would eventually prove significant, but for the immediate moment it served its purpose of completing the deception that had saved Zeus's life. Meanwhile, in the hidden sanctuary of the Dictaean cave, the real Zeus began the accelerated development that would characterize his divine childhood. Gaia had arranged for his nourishment through Amalthea, a divine goat whose milk possessed properties that would enhance the infant's natural growth rate, while providing the specific nutrients required for proper divine development. Amalthea's form combined the appearance of an ordinary goat with subtle divine attributes that marked her as a creature of cosmic significance. The goat's milk contained concentrated divine essence that had been filtered through Amalthea's connection to the fundamental forces of nourishment and growth. Each feeding provided Zeus not just with physical sustenance, but with the building blocks of divine power that would eventually manifest as his control over thunder, lightning, and the authority of kingship. The milk's golden colour reflected its supernatural properties, while its taste carried hints of ambrosia and nectar that spoke of its divine origin. Amalthea's devotion to her charge went beyond mere nourishment, as she seemed to understand the cosmic importance of the infant in her care. The divine goat positioned herself to provide warmth and comfort during Zeus's sleep, while her presence created a zone of peace and security that helped the developing god maintain the emotional stability necessary for healthy growth. Her gentle bleating served as a lullaby that carried protective enchantments woven into its melodic patterns. The nymphs who assisted in Zeus's care represented various aspects of the natural world that would later fall under his protection and authority. These minor goddesses possessed forms of ethereal beauty that reflected their connections to specific natural phenomena. Water nymphs with skin that rippled like flowing streams, tree nymphs whose hair changed colour with the seasons, and mountain nymphs whose strength could move boulders when necessary. Each nymph contributed unique skills to Zeus's upbringing, teaching him through play and interaction about the natural forces he would eventually command. The water nymphs showed him how moisture moved through the atmosphere, laying the groundwork for his future mastery of weather patterns. The tree nymphs demonstrated the cycles of growth and renewal that governed all living things, while the mountain nymphs taught him about the solid foundations that supported the world's structure. Zeus's physical development proceeded at a rate that amazed even his divine caregivers. Within weeks of his birth, the infant had grown to the size of a human toddler, his golden hair beginning to show the curl patterns that would characterize his adult appearance. His eyes developed the deep blue colour of storm clouds, while his voice gained strength and clarity that suggested the commanding presence he would one day possess. The accelerated growth extended beyond mere physical development to encompass intellectual and emotional maturation that prepared Zeus for the enormous challenges awaiting him. His infant games involved manipulating small lightning bolts that sparked between his fingers, while his laughter could generate minor thunderclaps that echoed through the cave's chambers. These early manifestations of power required careful guidance to prevent them from revealing his location to potential enemies. The nymphs developed elaborate games and exercises designed to help Zeus learn control over his emerging abilities while providing the physical and mental stimulation necessary for proper development. They created obstacle courses from cave formations that challenged his growing strength and agility, while teaching him to modulate his voice to prevent the thunderous echoes that might attract unwanted attention. As Zeus approached what would have been his first birthday in normal divine development, his physical form had reached the equivalent of a human adolescent, complete with the coordination and strength that would soon allow him to begin serious training in the arts of war and leadership. His divine nature manifested in subtle ways that distinguished him from his caregivers. His footsteps left brief impressions of golden light on the cave floor, while his breath sometimes carried the scent of ozone that preceded lightning strikes. The education that Zeus received during this period of hidden growth encompassed not just the practical skills he would need to challenge Cronus, but also the wisdom and understanding necessary to rule justly once he achieved victory. The nymphs shared stories of the Golden Age's prosperity, alongside accounts of the injustices that had motivated previous rebellions, helping the young god develop a balanced perspective on the responsibilities of leadership. Gaia herself served as Zeus's primary instructor in matters of cosmic significance, teaching him about the fundamental forces that govern creation and the delicate balances that maintained universal order. The Earth Mother's lessons covered everything from the movement of celestial bodies to the psychological patterns that drove divine behaviour, providing Zeus with the comprehensive understanding he would need to avoid repeating his father's and grandfather's mistakes. The young god's strategic education included detailed analysis of Uranus's downfall and Cronus's rise to power, helping him understand both the strengths and weaknesses that characterized previous cosmic rulers. These lessons emphasize the importance of justice, wisdom, and the willingness to accept counsel from others, qualities that had been lacking in his predecessors and had ultimately contributed to their problems. As Zeus reached the physical and mental equivalent of young adulthood within the protective confines of the Dictaean cave, Gaia began preparing him for the most dangerous phase of their elaborate plan. The Earth Mother's prophetic abilities had revealed that the time for Zeus's return to challenge his father was rapidly approaching, but the method of that return required careful orchestration to maximize the chances of success while minimizing the risk of discovery before the crucial moment arrived. The plan that Gaia devised centered on exploiting Cronus's own psychological weaknesses and the comfortable routines that characterized his rule during the Golden Age. The Titan king had grown accustomed to the predictable patterns of his court life, surrounded by servants and advisors whose loyalty had never been seriously questioned. This sense of security, combined with his belief that the threat represented by his children had been permanently eliminated, created an opportunity for infiltration that a more paranoid ruler might have prevented. Zeus's physical transformation for his infiltration mission required divine magic of the highest order. Gaia drew upon her deepest reserves of creative power to alter her grandson's appearance, reducing his divine stature to match that of a young adult mortal, while suppressing the obvious manifestations of his godhood that would immediately reveal his true identity. The golden glow that normally surrounded his form faded to a barely perceptible shimmer, while his storm cloud eyes shifted to a more mundane brown that would attract no special attention. The disguise extended beyond mere physical appearance to encompass the subtle energy signatures that divine beings use to identify one another. Gaia wove layers of concealment around Zeus's divine essence, creating a false aura that would register to casual observation as that of a minor nature spirit or demigod rather than a full Olympian god. This deception required constant concentration to maintain, but Zeus's accelerated development had provided him with the mental discipline necessary to sustain such complex magic while simultaneously carrying out his mission. The role of cupbearer that Zeus would assume in Kronos' court had been carefully selected for several strategic reasons. Cupbearers enjoyed regular access to their masters during meals and social gatherings, providing numerous opportunities to administer the crucial potion without arousing suspicion. The position also required a certain degree of physical attractiveness and grace, qualities that Zeus possessed in abundance even in his disguised form. Most importantly, cupbearers were expected to be seen but not heard, making them nearly invisible to their masters despite their constant presence. The preparation of the emetic potion that would force Kronos to regurgitate his imprisoned children required the combined knowledge and skills of both Gaia and Métis, the Titaness whose wisdom encompassed the deepest secrets of divine medicine and alchemy. Métis had remained largely neutral during the conflicts that had torn apart the Titan family, but her horror at Kronos' repeated infanticides had gradually transformed her into a secret ally of the resistance movement that was slowly forming around Zeus's cause. Métis possessed a form that reflected her nature as the embodiment of cunning intelligence and practical wisdom. Her appearance shifted constantly in subtle ways that made her difficult to remember clearly, as if her features rearranged themselves to match the expectations of whoever was observing her. This natural camouflage had allowed her to move freely through Titan society, while gathering the information and materials necessary for creating the potion that would liberate Zeus's siblings. The base ingredient for the emetic potion came from a plant that grew only in the deepest parts of Tartarus, where the primordial forces of creation and destruction existed in their most concentrated forms. This herb, known as the stomach turner, possessed properties that could affect even divine digestive systems with overwhelming force. Métis had risked her own safety to descend into the abyss and harvest the necessary quantities, using her shape-shifting abilities to avoid detection by the various monsters and guardians that protected Tartarus' secrets. The preparation process required precise timing and temperature control that challenged even Métis' considerable alchemical skills. The stomach turner had to be combined with water drawn from the river Styx, whose properties would ensure that the potion's effects could not be resisted or counteracted by divine will alone. The mixture also incorporated powdered adamantine, the same material from which Kronos' castrating sickle had been forged, creating a symbolic connection that would enhance the potion's psychological impact on the Titan King. Meti worked in a hidden laboratory that she'd constructed within a series of natural caves that connected to the Dictaean cave system. Her equipment included vessels forged from celestial bronze and stirring implements carved from the bones of primordial sea monsters, each tool specifically designed to handle substances that would destroy ordinary materials through their sheer divine potency. The laboratory's walls bore protective inscriptions that prevented the escape of magical energies that might reveal the location to hostile observers. The brewing process took place over the course of 7 days and nights, with Meti maintaining constant vigilance over temperature fluctuations and mixture consistency that could ruin the entire batch if allowed to vary beyond acceptable parameters. The Titaness barely slept during this period, sustained only by her determination to see Kronos' crimes finally punished and her confidence in Zeus's ability to establish a more just cosmic order. The finished potion possessed a deceptively innocent appearance that would be crucial to its successful administration. The liquid appeared as clear as mountain spring water, with only the faintest hint of effervescence that suggested the tremendous power contained within. Its taste, according to Meti's careful testing on volunteer subjects, carried no unusual flavours that would alert a suspicious drinker to its true nature. The potion's effects would manifest only after it had been fully consumed and absorbed into the target's divine system. Zeus's infiltration of Kronos' court required him to establish a plausible background story that would explain his sudden appearance and justify his employment as a cupbearer. Gaia provided him with detailed knowledge of a remote mountain community where a young man of his apparent age and background might realistically have originated. The Earth Mother's extensive network of minor nature spirits and geographical features allowed her to create false memories and evidence that would support Zeus's cover identity if anyone chose to investigate his claims. The approach to Mount Othrys, where Kronos maintained his primary palace, required Zeus to travel through territories controlled by various titans who might recognize his true nature if he made any significant mistakes in maintaining his disguise. The journey tested his ability to suppress his natural divine aura while navigating social situations that could expose his deception through casual conversation or unexpected challenges to his assumed identity. Zeus's arrival at the palace gates coincided with a period of staff turnover that made his appearance less conspicuous than it might have been under normal circumstances. Several of Kronos' previous servants had recently been dismissed for minor infractions, creating openings that the palace administrators were eager to fill with qualified replacements. Zeus's combination of apparent youth, physical attractiveness, and deferential manner made him an ideal candidate for the cupbearer position. The interview process that determined Zeus's employment involved demonstrations of his ability to handle delicate vessels without spillage, his knowledge of proper serving protocols, and his capacity to remain inconspicuous during formal gatherings. Zeus's divine nature, even suppressed as it was, provided him with supernatural grace and coordination that impressed his evaluators while remaining within the bounds of what exceptional mortal servants might achieve. Kronos' first direct encounter with his disguised son occurred during a formal banquet celebrating the anniversary of his rise to power. The Titan King sat upon a throne carved from a single massive diamond, its faceted surface reflecting the golden light that emanated from his divine form. His appearance had changed subtly since the early days of his reign, with stress lines around his eyes and a tendency towards suspicious glances that reflected his ongoing paranoia about potential threats to his authority. The banquet hall itself demonstrated the wealth and power that Kronos had accumulated during his rule. The walls rose to impossible heights, their surfaces covered with murals depicting the Titans' victories and the prosperity of the Golden Age. Tables carved from various precious stones accommodated hundreds of divine guests, while the ceiling displayed a constantly shifting representation of the night sky that showed Kronos' dominion over celestial phenomena. Zeus approached his father's throne with the mixture of reverence and invisibility that characterized an ideal servant, carrying a golden chalice filled with nectar that had been specially prepared for the evening's celebration. The young god's disguised appearance drew no particular attention from the assembled guests, who were accustomed to seeing attractive young servants attending to their needs during such gatherings. The crucial moment arrived when Zeus, following the established protocols for serving the king, presented the chalice containing Metis's carefully prepared potion. The liquid's innocent appearance and lack of unusual odour allowed it to pass Kronos's casual inspection without triggering any of the paranoid suspicions that might have led to more careful examination. The Titan King's attention remained focused on the political conversations taking place around his throne rather than on the seemingly routine service being provided by his new cupbearer. Cronus lifted the chalice to his lips and drank deeply, consuming the entire contents in a series of large swallows that demonstrated his confidence in the security of his palace and the loyalty of his servants. The potion's lack of immediate effects allowed the banquet to continue normally, with Zeus withdrawing to his assigned position among the other servants while maintaining the appearance of routine service duties. The emetic potion's effects began to manifest approximately 1 hour after consumption, starting with subtle digestive discomfort that Cronus initially attributed to the rich foods that had been served during the banquet. The Titan King's divine constitution resisted the potion's influence for several minutes, creating an internal struggle between his natural immunity to harmful substances and the supernatural power that Metis had woven into her creation. The first visible sign of the potion's success appeared as a slight pallor in Cronus's golden complexion, followed by an expression of confusion as he realized that something unusual was affecting his normally perfect digestive system. The Titan King's attempts to use his divine powers to counteract whatever was causing his discomfort proved futile against the Styx water component that made the potion's effects impossible to resist through force of will alone. The assembled guests began to notice their host's distress as Cronus doubled over in his diamond throne, his hands clutching at his midsection as waves of nausea swept through his divine form. The sight of their supposedly invincible ruler showing such obvious weakness created a ripple of concern and confusion throughout the banquet hall, though none of the guests suspected the true cause of his sudden illness. Cronus's first attempt to vomit produced only normal digestive fluids, but the potion's relentless pressure continued to build within his system until his body could no longer resist the overwhelming compulsion to expel the contents of his divine stomach. The Titan King's second convulsion brought forth the stone that Rhea had substituted for Zeus, its wrapped form still intact after years of imprisonment within his digestive system. The appearance of what appeared to be a swaddled infant emerging from Cronus's mouth created immediate pandemonium among the banquet guests. The assembled titans and lesser divine beings struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing, as their understanding of divine physiology had not prepared them for the possibility that Cronus had been carrying his consumed children within his body rather than destroying them completely. The stone's emergence was followed in rapid succession by the liberation of Zeus's 5 siblings, each emerging in reverse order of their original consumption. Poseidon appeared first, his adult form fully developed despite his years of imprisonment, his sea-green hair streaming with water that materialized from nowhere as his divine powers reasserted themselves. The newly liberated god's first action was to create a massive earthquake that shook the palace foundations, his rage at his imprisonment finding immediate expression through his control over seismic forces. Hades emerged next, his pale complexion and dark robes materializing around his form as he regained his freedom. The god of the underworld's presence immediately filled the banquet hall with an aura of solemnity and barely contained power that made even the other titans step back in unconscious recognition of his authority over death and the hidden realms. His dark eyes surveyed the scene with an intelligence that had been sharpened rather than diminished by his long captivity. Hera's liberation followed, the future queen of the gods appearing in her full divine glory, with a bearing that commanded immediate respect from all present. Her years of imprisonment had not weakened her, but had instead concentrated her natural authority into a presence that radiated regal power. The goddess's first glance around the banquet hall carried such intensity that several minor deities felt compelled to bow despite the chaotic circumstances. Demeter emerged with golden grain spontaneously sprouting from the floor around her feet, her agricultural powers reasserting themselves with such force that the palace's marble foundations cracked as plant roots sought purchase in the stone. The goddess of the harvest's face bore an expression of maternal fury that promised terrible consequences for anyone who had supported Cronus's regime of child murder. Finally, Hestia appeared, the eldest of the siblings and the first to have been consumed. The goddess of the hearth brought with her a warm golden light that contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding her liberation. Her presence seemed to create a zone of calm and stability that provided a focal point around which her siblings could orient themselves as they adjusted to their sudden freedom. The 5 liberated gods stood together for the first time in their existence, their combined divine presence creating energy fluctuations that threatened to tear apart the fabric of reality within the banquet hall. Each had emerged as a fully mature deity with powers that had been concentrated and refined during their imprisonment rather than weakened by it. Their shared experience of captivity had created bonds between them that would prove crucial in the coming conflict. Zeus chose this moment to drop his disguise, his mortal appearance dissolving to reveal his true divine form in all its storm-crowned glory. The revelation that their liberator had been present among them throughout the evening, disguised as a mere servant, demonstrated a level of cunning and strategic thinking that immediately established his credentials as a potential leader for their cause. The young god's first words to his siblings carried the authority of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. He outlined the basic elements of the resistance movement that had made their liberation possible, introducing them to the concept of overthrowing their father's regime and establishing a new cosmic order based on justice rather than paranoid tyranny. His speech demonstrated both the wisdom he had gained from Gaia's teachings and the natural charisma that would make him an effective leader. Kronos' recovery from the potion's effects left him facing a situation that represented his worst nightmare made manifest. The children he had consumed to prevent the fulfillment of Gaia's prophecy now stood before him as fully grown gods whose power rivaled his own. The sight of his 6 offspring united against him confirmed that his desperate measures had not only failed to prevent the prophesied rebellion, but had actually created the conditions that made it inevitable. The Titan King's attempts to reassert his authority over the situation met with immediate resistance from his liberated children, who had no intention of submitting to the rule of someone who had imprisoned them for years within his own body. The psychological trauma of their captivity, combined with their justified anger at his treatment of them, had transformed them into implacable enemies who would accept nothing less than his complete overthrow. The initial confrontation between Cronus and his children established the basic parameters of the conflict that would soon engulf the entire cosmos. The Titan King retained the loyalty of most of his generation, who viewed the rebellion as an unjustified challenge to legitimate authority, despite their private horror at his methods. The younger gods, however, possessed advantages in terms of motivation, unity of purpose, and the element of surprise that their sudden liberation had provided. The battle lines for the greatest war in cosmic history had been drawn within the confines of Kronos' own palace, with the site of his supposed triumph transformed into the launching point for his ultimate defeat. The liberation of Zeus's siblings from Kronos' body marked only the beginning of what would become the most comprehensive military campaign in cosmic history. While the immediate shock of their freedom had stunned the assembled Titans into temporary inaction, Zeus recognized that their window of opportunity would close rapidly once his father recovered from the chaos and began mobilizing his considerable resources. The young god's strategic mind, honed through years of careful preparation under Gaia's tutelage, immediately turned towards securing the allies and weapons necessary to transform a family rebellion into a war capable of reshaping the fundamental order of creation. Zeus's first priority involved liberating the Cyclopes from their renewed imprisonment in Tartarus. Following his initial overthrow of Uranus, Cronus had briefly freed these master craftsmen as a gesture of justice and gratitude for their support of his rebellion. However, as the Titan King's paranoia deepened over the centuries, he'd grown increasingly uncomfortable with the Cyclops' ability to forge weapons of divine power that could potentially threaten his rule. Their eventual re-imprisonment had occurred gradually, justified through a series of manufactured accusations and supposed security concerns that masked Cronus's fundamental fear of their capabilities. The journey to Tartarus required Zeus to navigate through layers of reality that existed beneath the normal structure of the cosmos. Unlike his father's earlier descent to free these same prisoners, Zeus approached the primordial abyss with a deeper understanding of its nature and the specific challenges it presented to divine consciousness. His accelerated education under Gaia's guidance had included detailed instruction in the metaphysical geography of existence, preparing him for the psychological pressures that would assault any being who dared to enter the realm where the cosmos deposited its most dangerous elements. Tartarus had evolved since Cronus's last visit, its boundaries expanding and its internal structure growing more complex as additional prisoners and cosmic refuse accumulated within its depths. The abyss now contained not only the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires, but also various monsters, failed experiments in creation, and abstract concepts that had been deemed too dangerous for normal reality. These additions had transformed Tartarus from a simple prison into a chaotic ecosystem, where different forms of cosmic rejection interacted in unpredictable ways. The descent through Tartarus's outer layers exposed Zeus to temperatures that fluctuated between absolute zero and the heat of stellar cores, while the pressure alternated between perfect vacuum and forces that could compress divine matter into crystalline forms. These extreme conditions served as natural defences that discouraged casual intrusion, though Zeus's divine nature provided him with the resilience necessary to continue deeper into the abyss, despite the mounting physical stress. The Cyclops' prison occupied a region of Tartarus where the normal laws of space and time had been deliberately distorted to create a containment system that was virtually escape-proof. The three brothers, Brontes, Sterapus and Arges, had been bound with chains forged from crystallized concepts of imprisonment, restraints that drew their strength from the abstract idea of captivity rather than mere physical materials. These metaphysical bonds prevented the Cyclops from exercising their divine powers while simultaneously feeding on their creative energy to strengthen themselves. Zeus found the three master craftsmen in a state that combined physical weakness with undiminished mental acuity. Their single eyes, normally blazing with the fire of creation, had dimmed to barely glowing embers that reflected their years of enforced inactivity. Their massive bodies, built for the demanding work of divine smithing, had grown gaunt from the spiritual starvation that came from being prevented from practicing their craft. Despite their weakened condition, their minds remained sharp and their knowledge of metallurgy and weapon crafting had actually expanded during their imprisonment as they used mental exercises to explore theoretical possibilities they had never had time to consider during their active periods. The liberation of the Cyclopes required Zeus to confront the metaphysical nature of their bonds, rather than simply applying brute force to physical restraints. His divine power, channeled through understanding rather than raw strength, dissolved the conceptual chains by asserting a stronger idea, that of justice and righteous liberation overcoming arbitrary imprisonment. The process demanded precise control over abstract forces that few gods could manipulate, demonstrating the depth of wisdom Zeus had acquired during his hidden education. Brontes, the eldest of the Cyclopes, was the first to regain his full strength following liberation. His single eye blazed back to life with such intensity that it illuminated the surrounding darkness of Tartarus like a miniature sun, while his massive hands flexed with renewed power as divine crafting energy flowed through his system once again. The Cyclops' gratitude towards Zeus went beyond mere appreciation for freedom. He recognized in the young god the potential for a ruler who would value skilled craftsmanship and respect the contributions of those who served the cosmic order through their specialized abilities. Steropes and Arges recovered more slowly, their bodies requiring additional time to readjust to the flow of creative energy that had been blocked for so long. Steropes, whose specialty involved the creation of lightning and electrical phenomena, began generating small sparks between his fingers as his powers returned, while Arges, master of bright light and illumination, caused the area around him to glow with a warm radiance that pushed back the oppressive darkness of their prison. The three Cyclops' immediate response to their liberation involved a unanimous offer to forge weapons specifically designed for Zeus and his siblings in their coming war against Kronos. This offer represented far more than simple gratitude. It constituted a strategic alliance between the most skilled weaponsmiths in creation and the gods who possessed the power to overthrow the existing cosmic order. The Cyclops understood that their own security and freedom depended on the success of Zeus's rebellion, making them natural allies whose interests aligned perfectly with the revolutionary cause. The forging of the divine weapons took place in a workshop that the Cyclops constructed within a volcanic region of the Earth where Gaia's power provided both the necessary heat and the raw materials required for their unprecedented project. The workshop itself represented a marvel of divine engineering, with forges that burned at temperatures exceeding those found in stellar cores and anvils, carved from adamantine that had been compressed under cosmic pressures until it achieved perfect hardness and resonance. Zeus's thunderbolt emerged as the masterpiece of Cyclops' craftsmanship, a weapon that combined raw destructive power with precise control mechanisms that allowed its wielder to modulate everything from gentle static electricity to lightning bolts capable of splitting mountains. The Thunderbolt's construction required metals that existed only in the hearts of dying stars, combined with crystallized storm essence that the Cyclops had been collecting and refining for millennia in anticipation of creating such a weapon. The finished Thunderbolt possessed a form that shifted between different configurations depending on the type of electrical discharge its wielder intended to create. In its basic state, it appeared as a jagged spear of pure energy that crackled with contained lightning, its surface inscribed with patterns that channeled and focused electrical force with mathematical precision. When activated for maximum power, the weapon transformed into a branching network of electricity that could strike multiple targets simultaneously or concentrate its entire force against a single opponent with devastating effect. Poseidon's trident required different materials and techniques, as its power derived from control over water, earthquakes, and the fundamental forces that shaped the Earth's surface. The Cyclops forged its three prongs from metals that had been tempered in the deepest ocean trenches, where pressure and cold had created unique crystalline structures that resonated with aquatic energies. The trident's handle incorporated wood from trees that had grown at the boundary between land and sea, their roots extending into both terrestrial and marine environments. The completed trident possessed the ability to generate earthquakes through harmonic vibrations that could be transmitted through solid matter across vast distances. Its wielder could create tsunamis by manipulating ocean currents and tidal forces, while its more subtle applications included the ability to locate underground water sources and control the flow of rivers and streams. The weapon's three prongs could separate to strike different targets simultaneously or combine their power for maximum impact against a single opponent. Hades received a helmet of invisibility that represented perhaps the most complex achievement in Cyclops' craftsmanship, as it required the manipulation of light perception and the fundamental nature of visibility itself. The helmet's construction incorporated materials that existed at the boundary between physical reality and abstract concepts, including metals that had been forged in the space between dimensions and gems that contained crystallized darkness from the void that preceded creation. The helmet's invisibility effect operated on multiple levels simultaneously, rendering its wearer invisible not only to normal sight, but also to divine perception, prophetic vision, and even the abstract awareness that allowed gods to sense each other's presence. This comprehensive concealment made the helmet an invaluable tool for reconnaissance, surprise attacks, and strategic positioning during combat. The weapon also provided its wearer with enhanced hearing and the ability to move without creating sound, making it perfect for stealth operations. While the Cyclops laboured to complete these divine weapons, Zeus turned his attention to securing another crucial alliance that would provide the raw military strength necessary to challenge Kronos' established power base. The Hecatonchires, still imprisoned in Tartarus alongside their Cyclops brothers, represented a force of physical destruction that could match entire armies of conventional divine warriors. Their liberation required a second ascent into the abyss, though Zeus's previous experience with Tartarus's challenges made this journey somewhat less difficult than his first. The three Hecatonchires, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges, had endured their re-imprisonment with the patient endurance that characterized beings whose existence spanned geological ages. Their massive forms, each possessing 50 heads and 100 arms, had adapted to their confinement by developing new forms of consciousness that allowed them to think and plan on scales that exceeded even normal divine comprehension. Their multiple heads had spent decades analysing every aspect of their imprisonment, developing escape strategies, and planning revenge against those responsible for their captivity. Cottus, the most intellectually focused of the three brothers, had used his imprisonment to develop theoretical frameworks for large-scale warfare that incorporated the unique advantages provided by his multiple limbs and heads. His strategic thinking had evolved beyond simple applications of brute force to encompass complex tactical maneuvers that could exploit the chaos and confusion created by his overwhelming physical presence on a battlefield. Briareus had concentrated on developing his already formidable physical capabilities, using isometric exercises and mental conditioning to maintain peak strength despite his confinement. His 100 arms had practiced coordinated movements that would allow him to wield multiple weapons simultaneously or hurl projectiles with devastating accuracy while maintaining perfect balance and defensive positioning. Gyges had focused on developing his sensory capabilities, training his 50 heads to process information from multiple sources simultaneously while maintaining perfect coordination between his various consciousness centers. This enhanced awareness would prove invaluable during combat situations, where the ability to track multiple opponents and environmental factors could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The liberation of the Hecatonchires created immediate changes in the cosmic balance of power that were perceptible to divine beings throughout creation. Their freedom released tremendous amounts of kinetic energy that had been building during their imprisonment, causing earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and atmospheric disturbances that announced their return to active participation in cosmic affairs. The three brothers' first acts involved testing their restored capabilities through demonstrations of strength that reshaped entire mountain ranges and altered the courses of major rivers. The alliance between Zeus and the Hecatonchires was formalized through oaths that bound all parties to mutual support and shared objectives in the coming war. The three brothers pledged their overwhelming physical strength to Zeus's cause, while the young god promised that their contributions would be recognized and rewarded in the new cosmic order that would emerge following Kronos' defeat. These oaths, sworn on the river Styx, became unbreakable bonds that would hold throughout the coming conflict and beyond. The recruitment of allies from among the Titan generation itself presented Zeus with his most delicate diplomatic challenge, as it required convincing powerful beings to abandon their loyalty to Cronus despite family bonds and established relationships that had endured for millennia. The success of this diplomatic effort would largely determine whether the coming conflict would be a limited family rebellion or a comprehensive civil war that divided the entire divine community. Prometheus emerged as Zeus's most valuable recruit among the Titans, bringing with him not only his own considerable powers but also crucial intelligence about Kronos' military capabilities and strategic plans. The Titan of forethought had grown increasingly disturbed by his brother's descent into paranoid tyranny, particularly the repeated infanticides that violated fundamental principles of family loyalty and natural order. Prometheus's ability to perceive future possibilities had shown him glimpses of the disasters that would result from Kronos' continued rule, making rebellion not just morally necessary but practically inevitable. Prometheus's intelligence gathering had revealed that Kronos was already aware of the growing opposition to his rule and had begun mobilizing his own military forces in preparation for the conflict he knew was coming. The Titan King had established alliances with the various monsters and primordial beings who shared his interest in maintaining the current cosmic order, while also developing new weapons and defensive strategies designed to counter the specific advantages that Zeus's faction might possess. Themis, the Titaness of divine law and proper custom, represented another crucial addition to Zeus's alliance. Her support provided moral legitimacy to the rebellion by establishing that Kronos' actions had violated the fundamental principles of justice that governed cosmic order. Themis' ability to perceive the abstract structures of law and righteousness allowed her to demonstrate that Zeus's cause represented not mere ambition, but a necessary correction to cosmic injustices that threatened the stability of creation itself. The recruitment of these Titan allies created fractures within Kronos' power base that would prove impossible to repair. Family loyalties that had seemed unshakable began to dissolve as individual Titans were forced to choose between supporting their brother's increasingly tyrannical rule or joining a rebellion that promised to restore justice and natural order to cosmic governance. These divisions would persist throughout the coming war, creating opportunities for Zeus's forces while simultaneously complicating the political landscape that would need to be navigated following any eventual victory. The gathering storm of divine alliance and counter-alliance was creating conditions for a conflict that would exceed anything previously witnessed in cosmic history. The weapons being forged, the alliances being formed, and the strategies being developed would soon be tested in battles that would determine not just the fate of individual gods, but the fundamental nature of cosmic order itself. The mobilization of divine forces that followed Zeus's successful recruitment of the Cyclops, Hecatonchires, and sympathetic Titans created a polarization of cosmic power that made armed conflict inevitable. Within weeks of the liberation at Kronos' palace, the fundamental geography of divine politics had shifted as gods throughout creation were forced to declare their allegiances in what was rapidly becoming an existential struggle for control of the universe itself. The careful diplomatic maneuvering that had characterized the initial phases of the rebellion gave way to open military preparation as both sides began establishing the strongholds and supply lines that would support a prolonged campaign. Mount Olympus emerged as the natural headquarters for Zeus's revolutionary forces due to its strategic position and symbolic significance. This towering peak, the highest mountain in the known world, rose from the earth with such majesty that its snow-capped summit seemed to pierce the dome of the sky itself. The mountain's slopes contained numerous caves and hidden valleys that could accommodate large numbers of divine warriors while providing natural defensive positions against potential attacks. More importantly, Olympus possessed an inherent connection to the celestial realm that made it an ideal base of operations for gods seeking to challenge the established cosmic order. The transformation of Mount Olympus into a military fortress required extensive modifications to its natural structure. Zeus's engineers, working under the direction of the Cyclopes, carved vast halls and chambers into the mountain's interior while preserving its external appearance to avoid alerting Cronus's forces to the scale of preparations taking place. These underground complexes included armories for storing the divine weapons being produced in ever-increasing quantities, barracks capable of housing thousands of divine warriors, and command centres where strategic planning could take place without risk of enemy surveillance. The main throne room that Zeus established within Olympus reflected both his growing authority and his vision for the new cosmic order he intended to create. Unlike Kronos' ostentatious diamond throne, Zeus chose to seat himself on a chair carved from a single piece of oak that had grown at the boundary between earth and sky. The wood's natural grain patterns had been enhanced through divine craftsmanship to display constantly shifting images of storm clouds and lightning, while the throne's high back bore inscriptions in the ancient script that recorded the fundamental laws of justice and natural order. The defensive preparations around Mount Olympus incorporated both conventional military engineering and innovative applications of divine power that created obstacles unlike anything previously seen in cosmic warfare. The Cyclops constructed a series of lightning rods around the mountain's perimeter that could channel Zeus's electrical attacks into devastating defensive barriers, while the Hecatonchires used their multiple arms to position massive boulders in configurations that would funnel attacking forces into predetermined killing zones. The recruitment of minor gods, nature spirits, and other divine beings to Zeus's cause created a diverse coalition that brought together powers and abilities that had never before been coordinated for military purposes. River gods contributed their knowledge of water-based tactics and their ability to control flooding and drought across vast territories. Mountain spirits provided expertise in defensive positioning and the manipulation of terrain features that could channel or redirect enemy movements. Sea nymphs offered intelligence-gathering capabilities through their connections to marine life and their ability to travel undetected through aquatic environments. Meanwhile, Cronus responded to the growing threat by establishing his own military headquarters atop Mount Othrys, a peak that rivaled Olympus in height and strategic significance, but possessed a darker, more forbidding character that reflected the Titan King's increasingly authoritarian approach to governance. The mountain's bugged black stone composition absorbed light rather than reflecting it, creating an atmosphere of perpetual twilight that seemed appropriate for a ruler whose paranoia had transformed him into a tyrant willing to devour his own children to maintain power. The fortification of Mount Othrys proceeded along different principles than the defensive preparations at Olympus, emphasizing overwhelming force and intimidation rather than strategic flexibility. Cronus's engineers carved massive battlements from the mountain's dark stone, creating walls that rose to impossible heights and bristled with defensive weapons designed to destroy rather than merely repel attackers. The fortress's architecture incorporated elements of psychological warfare, with towers shaped like grasping claws and gates that resembled the mouths of primordial monsters. Cronus's recruitment efforts focused on beings whose power derived from chaos, destruction, and the primordial forces that had existed before the establishment of cosmic order. The Titan King's promises of increased authority and freedom from moral constraints attracted various monsters that had been marginalized or suppressed during his earlier, more benevolent reign. Giants whose strength rivaled that of the Hecatonchires pledged their services in exchange for the right to rampage freely across territories that would be granted to them following victory. The division of the Titan generation itself created some of the most painful personal conflicts of the entire war, as family bonds that had endured since the earliest days of creation were severed by irreconcilable differences over fundamental questions of justice and governance. Oceanus, the eldest of the Titans, struggled with competing loyalties as he recognized both the legitimacy of Zeus's grievances against Cronus and the importance of maintaining family unity among his generation. His eventual decision to remain neutral rather than actively supporting either side reflected the complexity of emotions and obligations that characterized many divine beings during this period. Atlas, one of the most powerful of the younger Titans, became one of Cronus's most valuable military commanders due to his combination of tremendous physical strength and strategic intelligence. His decision to support his father's cause stemmed not from approval of Cronus's methods, but from a genuine belief that the established cosmic order, despite its flaws, provided more stability than the revolutionary changes that Zeus proposed. Atlas's military experience, gained through centuries of maintaining order in remote regions of creation, made him an invaluable asset in planning defensive strategies and coordinating the movements of diverse military forces. The war's opening phases were characterized by a series of probing attacks and counterattacks as both sides tested their opponent's capabilities while avoiding the kind of massive confrontation that might determine the conflict's outcome prematurely. Zeus's forces utilized their superior mobility and the element of surprise to conduct raids against isolated Titan strongholds, capturing supplies and intelligence while demonstrating their ability to strike anywhere within Kronos' territory. These early operations served multiple purposes, providing valuable combat experience for Zeus's newly recruited allies, while simultaneously forcing Kronos to spread his defensive forces across a wider area than he might have preferred. The first major engagement of the war occurred when a force of Zeus's supporters attempted to capture the fortress that guarded the entrance to Tartarus. This strategic objective would have prevented Kronos from accessing the primordial abyss for additional recruits, while potentially allowing Zeus to liberate any remaining prisoners who might strengthen his cause. The attack, led by Poseidon and supported by a contingent of sea gods and water spirits, initially achieved surprise and managed to breach the fortress's outer defences through a coordinated assault that combined seismic attacks with flooding tactics. However, the fortress's garrison, commanded by Menoetius, one of Atlas's brothers, mounted a determined defence that exploited the attackers' unfamiliarity with the unique challenges posed by fighting near Tartarus itself. The proximity to the primordial abyss created gravitational anomalies and temporal distortions that disrupted conventional military tactics, while the psychic pressure emanating from the imprisoned beings within Tartarus affected the mental state of warriors on both sides. The battle raged for 3 days before Zeus's forces were compelled to withdraw, having learned valuable lessons about the difficulties of conducting operations in areas where the normal laws of physics were compromised by primordial forces. The failure to capture the Tartarus fortress prompted Zeus to reconsider his military strategy and place greater emphasis on the development of new weapons and tactics that could overcome the unique challenges posed by fighting against opponents who controlled fundamental aspects of cosmic geography. The Cyclops responded to this need by creating specialized equipment designed for use in environments where conventional divine powers might be compromised or redirected by external forces. The development of these new weapons required extensive experimentation with materials and energy sources that had never before been combined for military purposes. Adamantine, the virtually indestructible metal that had been used to forge Kronos' castrating sickle, was refined through new techniques that enhanced its ability to channel and focus divine energy. The resulting weapons possessed cutting edges that could slice through the fabric of space itself, and defensive properties that could deflect attacks based on fundamental forces rather than mere physical projectiles. Kronos' response to these innovations involved recruiting allies whose powers operated on scales that exceeded normal divine capabilities. The Titan King established contact with primordial beings that had remained dormant since the earliest days of creation, entities whose awakening required careful negotiation and substantial concessions regarding their future roles in cosmic governance. These ancient powers brought with them abilities that predated the establishment of natural laws, making them capable of effects that seemed impossible even by divine standards. The recruitment of primordial allies created new complications for both sides as these ancient beings possessed their own agendas and objectives that did not necessarily align with the immediate goals of either Zeus or Cronus. Their participation in the conflict introduced elements of unpredictability that made long-term strategic planning increasingly difficult, while their immense power created the potential for collateral damage on a scale that could threaten the stability of creation itself. The escalating arms race between the opposing forces led to the development of increasingly exotic weapons and defensive systems that pushed the boundaries of what was possible within the existing cosmic framework. Divine smiths working for both sides experimented with techniques that bordered on the creation of entirely new forms of matter and energy, while military strategists developed tactics that incorporated the manipulation of time, space, and causality as standard elements of battlefield planning. The psychological pressure created by these developments began to affect the mental state of combatants on both sides, as the prospect of cosmic annihilation became an increasingly real possibility. Warriors who had entered the conflict with confidence in their abilities and certainty about their cause found themselves confronting the possibility that their actions might result in the destruction of everything they sought to protect or conquer. The civilian populations of various divine realms began to experience the indirect effects of the military build-up as resources were diverted from peaceful purposes to support the war effort. Regions that had previously enjoyed the abundance characteristic of the Golden Age found themselves subject to rationing and conscription as their local rulers were drawn into the expanding conflict. The disruption of normal economic and social patterns created refugee populations of minor divine beings who sought safety in neutral territories or attempted to remain invisible until the conflict's resolution. The war's expansion beyond its original participants created a cascade effect that drew in divine beings who had initially hoped to remain neutral. Local conflicts that had been suppressed or ignored during the peaceful years of Cronus's early reign suddenly erupted as the breakdown of central authority created opportunities for settling old grievances. Regional power struggles that had nothing to do with the original dispute between Zeus and Kronos became entangled with the larger conflict, as various factions sought to align themselves with whichever side seemed most likely to advance their particular interests. The protracted nature of the Titanomachy had begun to reveal fundamental weaknesses in both military organizations that neither Zeus nor Kronos had anticipated during their initial strategic planning. After months of inconclusive skirmishes and failed attempts at decisive victory, both sides found themselves reassessing their approaches to a conflict that had already exceeded all previous examples of divine warfare in both scope and duration. The stalemate that had developed around the heavily fortified positions on Mount Olympus and Mount Othrys created opportunities for new alliances and tactical innovations that would ultimately determine the war's outcome. Zeus's recognition of his forces' limitations in conventional siege warfare prompted him to pursue diplomatic solutions that had been overlooked during the conflict's more aggressive early phases. The young god's strategic advisors, led by Prometheus and Metis, had identified the Hecatonchires as potential game-changers whose full capabilities had not yet been properly utilized in combat operations. While Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges had participated in several battles with devastating effect, their deployment had been limited to supporting roles that failed to exploit their unique advantages as beings whose very existence challenged conventional military thinking. The three brothers possessed capabilities that extended far beyond their obvious physical advantages of multiple heads and arms. Their consciousness operated on levels that allowed them to process information and coordinate actions in ways that single-minded beings could barely comprehend. Each of their 50 heads could focus on different aspects of a tactical situation simultaneously, while their 100 arms could execute complex maneuvers that would require extensive coordination between multiple conventional warriors. More importantly, their experience during their previous imprisonment had taught them patience and strategic thinking that complemented their overwhelming physical power. Cottus had developed an understanding of large-scale battlefield dynamics that incorporated variables most military commanders never considered. His multiple heads allowed him to maintain simultaneous awareness of enemy movements across vast areas, while calculating the probable outcomes of different tactical decisions in real time. During combat, he could track hundreds of individual opponents, while adjusting his own actions to exploit weaknesses in their formations, or capitalize on opportunities created by his brother's activities. Briareus possessed an intuitive grasp of physics and engineering that made him uniquely effective at siege warfare and defensive operations. His 100 arms could hurl projectiles with mathematical precision, while simultaneously constructing fortifications or dismantling enemy positions. His understanding of structural weak points allowed him to bring down entire fortress walls with carefully placed strikes, while his ability to work with multiple tools simultaneously made him capable of construction projects that would normally require teams of skilled engineers. Gyges had focused his multiple consciousness centers on developing enhanced sensory capabilities that made him an invaluable source of intelligence and reconnaissance information. His 50 heads could process visual, auditory, and other sensory data from multiple directions simultaneously, creating a comprehensive awareness of battlefield conditions that exceeded even divine standards of perception. His ability to detect subtle changes in enemy behavior patterns or environmental conditions often provided advance warning of planned attacks or strategic shifts. The decision to fully integrate the Hecatonchires into Zeus's military planning represented a fundamental shift in strategic thinking that acknowledged the unique nature of the conflict they were fighting. Traditional divine warfare had relied heavily on individual champions and small unit tactics that emphasized personal skill and divine power over coordinated mass action. The Titanomachy's scale and complexity required new approaches that could leverage the overwhelming force represented by beings like the Hecatonchires, while maintaining the flexibility necessary for effective command and control. The first major operation that fully utilized the Hecatonchires' capabilities targeted a series of supply depots that Cronus had established in the mountainous regions between Mount Othrys and the territories controlled by his allied Titans. These facilities contained the weapons, provisions, and magical materials necessary to sustain his forces during extended campaign operations, making them crucial strategic objectives whose destruction would severely compromise his military effectiveness. The assault plan developed by Zeus's commanders incorporated the Hecatonchires' unique abilities in ways that maximized their impact while minimizing their exposure to concentrated enemy fire. Cottus would approach each target from the east, using his multiple heads to identify defensive positions and coordinate with long-range artillery support provided by Zeus's lightning attacks. Briareus would simultaneously assault from the west, his 100 arms hurling massive boulders and improvised projectiles to overwhelm defensive positions while creating breaches in fortified walls. Gyges would coordinate the overall operation from a central position, his enhanced senses providing real-time intelligence about enemy responses and tactical adjustments. The execution of this coordinated assault exceeded even Zeus's optimistic expectations for its effectiveness. The Hecatonchires' ability to maintain perfect coordination, despite operating across vast distances, created a level of tactical synchronization that Kronos' defenders had never encountered. Their attacks struck with such overwhelming force and precision that entire fortress complexes were reduced to rubble within hours, while their coordinated movements prevented enemy forces from mounting effective counterattacks or organizing orderly retreats. The psychological impact of witnessing the Hecatonchires operating at full capacity proved as significant as their physical accomplishments. Enemy soldiers who had previously shown determination and courage in facing conventional divine opponents found themselves paralyzed by the sight of beings whose very existence challenged their understanding of possible combat capabilities. The spectacle of 100-armed giants hurling mountain-sized boulders with perfect accuracy while their 50 heads tracked multiple targets simultaneously created a level of battlefield terror that spread rapidly through Kronos' military organization. The success of these operations prompted several neutral titans to reconsider their positions regarding the conflict's likely outcome. Oceanus, who had maintained strict neutrality despite family pressure from both sides, began providing indirect support to Zeus's forces through the manipulation of water supplies and river systems that affected the movement of troops and materials. His vast network of streams, rivers, and underground water sources gave him unparalleled ability to influence logistics and communications across the entire theatre of operations. Tethys, Oceanus' wife and the personification of the nourishing flow of fresh water, coordinated with her husband to create supply difficulties for Kronos' forces, while ensuring that Zeus's supporters had access to clean water and fertile growing conditions. Her control over springs and wells allowed her to deny water access to enemy positions, while creating oases that could support friendly operations in previously uninhabitable regions. The gradual erosion of Kronos' support base accelerated as news of Zeus's victories spread throughout the divine community. Titans who had supported the established order primarily out of habit or family loyalty began to question whether their continued allegiance served their own interests or those of their subjects. The spectacle of Kronos' increasingly desperate measures to maintain control, including his recruitment of chaotic primordial beings whose presence threatened cosmic stability, alienated divine beings who valued order and predictability above political loyalty. Prometheus's defection to Zeus's cause brought with it intelligence advantages that proved crucial to the young god's strategic planning. The Titan of Forethought possessed detailed knowledge of Kronos' military organization, including the locations of hidden supply caches, the identities of key commanders, and the specific capabilities of various allied forces. More importantly, his prophetic abilities allowed him to anticipate Kronos' likely responses to different tactical scenarios, providing Zeus with the information necessary to stay ahead of his father's countermoves. The intelligence that Prometheus provided revealed significant weaknesses in Kronos' position that had not been apparent from external observation. The Titan King's paranoia had led him to compartmentalize his military organization in ways that prevented effective coordination between different units and commanders. His distrust of subordinates had resulted in a command structure that required his personal approval for most significant decisions, creating bottlenecks that slowed response times and reduced tactical flexibility. Prometheus also revealed that Kronos' recruitment of primordial allies had created internal tensions within his coalition that Zeus could potentially exploit. Many of these ancient beings possessed their own agendas that conflicted with Kronos' objectives, while their immense power made them difficult to control or direct effectively. Several had already expressed dissatisfaction with their assigned roles in the conflict, creating opportunities for diplomatic initiatives that might neutralize or even turn these powerful entities against their current employer. The psychological warfare that both sides employed during this phase of the conflict reflected the increasingly desperate nature of their struggle for ultimate victory. Zeus's forces utilized their growing momentum to spread propaganda that emphasized the inevitability of their eventual triumph, while highlighting the moral justifications for their rebellion against Kronos' tyrannical rule. Messages carried by wind spirits and water nymphs reached divine communities throughout creation, describing the liberation of Zeus's siblings and the restoration of justice that would follow the establishment of a new cosmic order. Kronos responded with his own propaganda campaign that focused on the dangers of revolutionary change and the benefits of maintaining established authority structures. His messages emphasized the prosperity and stability that had characterized the Golden Age under his rule, while warning of the chaos and destruction that would result from Zeus's victory. The Titan King's propagandists portrayed the rebellion as an ungrateful betrayal of a benevolent ruler by ambitious children who sought power for its own sake, rather than the good of creation. The effectiveness of these competing propaganda efforts varied significantly among different audiences within the divine community. Younger gods and nature spirits, who had less investment in the existing order and greater sympathy for Zeus's grievances against his father, generally responded favourably to revolutionary messages. Older divine beings, particularly those who remembered the chaos that had preceded Cronus's rise to power, showed greater receptivity to arguments emphasizing stability and continuity. The development of divine curses as weapons of psychological warfare represented an innovation that added new dimensions to the conflict's brutality. Both sides recruited specialists in cursecraft, whose abilities could inflict long-term psychological and spiritual damage on the enemy personnel. These curses ranged from relatively minor afflictions that caused persistent bad luck or uncomfortable physical sensations, to major enchantments that could drive their targets to madness or strip them of their divine powers entirely. Zeus's curse specialists, working under the direction of Hecate and other goddesses associated with magic and transformation, developed curses specifically designed to exploit the psychological weaknesses that Prometheus's intelligence had revealed among Kronos' supporters. These enchantments targeted the guilt and moral uncertainty that many Titans felt about supporting their brother's increasingly authoritarian rule, amplifying these doubts until they became debilitating psychological burdens that affected combat effectiveness and strategic decision-making. Kronos' curse workers focused their efforts on creating enchantments that would undermine the unity and coordination that had become Zeus's greatest tactical advantages. Their curses sought to generate suspicion and paranoia among the revolutionary coalition, encouraging commanders to question their allies' loyalty and second-guess tactical decisions that required trust and cooperation to execute effectively. The escalating use of psychological warfare created an atmosphere of pervasive mistrust and anxiety that affected both military personnel and civilian populations throughout the regions controlled by the warring factions. Divine beings who had previously enjoyed the security and predictability of peaceful existence found themselves constantly vigilant for signs of enemy influence or hostile magic. The psychological toll of this constant stress began to manifest in various forms of divine neurosis and behavioral disorders that had previously been unknown in cosmic society. The prophecies and oracular pronouncements that both sides commissioned during this period reflected their growing desperation for information about the conflict's ultimate outcome. Professional oracles and prophetic spirits found themselves overwhelmed with requests for predictions about battle outcomes, alliance shifts, and the long-term consequences of various strategic decisions. The accuracy of these predictions varied widely as the unprecedented nature of the conflict made it difficult even for beings with genuine prophetic abilities to perceive clear patterns in the chaotic flow of events. Some of the most significant prophecies focused on the role that specific individuals would play in determining the war's outcome. Several oracles identified Zeus himself as the key figure whose personal choices and actions would ultimately decide whether the rebellion succeeded or failed. These predictions emphasized the importance of his ability to maintain the coalition he had assembled while avoiding the psychological traps that had destroyed previous cosmic rulers. Other prophecies focused on the potential consequences of the conflict for the fundamental structure of creation itself. Several seers warned that the level of divine power being unleashed during major battles was approaching thresholds that could cause permanent damage to the cosmic order, potentially unraveling the basic laws that governed reality. These warnings prompted both sides to consider limitations on their use of the most destructive weapons and tactics, though the pressure to achieve decisive victory often overrode such cautionary considerations. The gradual shift in momentum toward Zeus's forces became apparent to neutral observers through a series of indicators that extended beyond simple military victories. The quality and quantity of divine beings joining the revolutionary cause began to exceed those supporting Kronos, while the territories controlled by Zeus's coalition expanded steadily, despite the Titan King's efforts to maintain his defensive positions. More significantly, the psychological confidence and morale that had initially favoured the established order began to shift toward the rebels as their string of successes created an impression of inevitable victory. The economic disruption caused by the prolonged conflict had begun to affect the daily lives of divine beings throughout creation in ways that influenced their political loyalties. Regions that had previously enjoyed abundance and prosperity found themselves struggling with shortages of essential materials and services as resources were diverted to support military operations. The breakdown of normal trade relationships and supply chains created hardships that many divine beings blamed on Cronus' decision to continue fighting rather than negotiating a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Human populations, though largely unaware of the cosmic struggle taking place among their divine rulers, began to experience the indirect effects of the war through changes in natural phenomena and environmental conditions. Weather patterns became increasingly erratic as the conflict between Zeus and Kronos disrupted the normal functioning of atmospheric systems. Agricultural cycles showed signs of instability that threatened the abundance that had characterized the Golden Age, while natural disasters occurred with greater frequency and intensity than previous generations had experienced. The mounting pressure created by these various factors was beginning to create cracks in the unity of Kronos' coalition that Zeus's intelligence network was working to exploit through targeted diplomatic initiatives. Several Titan commanders had begun to express private doubts about the wisdom of continuing a conflict that seemed increasingly likely to end in defeat, while the strain of prolonged warfare was revealing personality conflicts and strategic disagreements that had previously remained hidden beneath the surface of apparent unity. The recognition that conventional siege tactics would prove insufficient against Kronos' heavily fortified position on Mount Othrys led Zeus to authorize the most ambitious military operation of the entire conflict. The combined assault that his commanders planned would integrate every available resource and ally into a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm the Titan stronghold through sheer concentrated force rather than gradual attrition. This final offensive would deploy the Cyclops' most powerful weapons, the Hecatoncheira's overwhelming physical capabilities, and the diverse magical abilities of Zeus's divine coalition in a synchronized assault that would either achieve decisive victory or result in catastrophic defeat. The preparation for this climactic battle required months of detailed planning and resource accumulation that strained Zeus's organizational capabilities to their limits. Supply trains stretching across entire continents brought specialized equipment and magical materials to staging areas hidden in the valleys surrounding Mount Olympus. The Cyclops worked continuously to produce ammunition for Zeus's thunderbolts, crafting lightning charges of unprecedented power that incorporated metals extracted from the cores of dying stars and crystallized storm essence that had been refined through techniques developed specifically for this operation. Brontes, the eldest of the Cyclops, had designed a series of lightning conductors that would allow Zeus to channel his electrical attacks through the mountain's mineral veins, creating a network of energy distribution that could strike multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining the precision necessary to avoid friendly casualties. These conductors required installation at specific points around Mount Othrys, where the geological structure would support the transmission of divine electricity, a task that demanded infiltration missions conducted under conditions of extreme secrecy and danger. The infiltration teams responsible for installing the lightning conductors consisted of minor gods and nature spirits whose abilities made them uniquely suited for stealth operations in hostile territory. Earth elementals could move through solid rock without creating detectable disturbances, while air spirits could transport equipment through atmospheric currents that remained invisible to conventional surveillance methods. Water nymphs utilized underground streams and hidden springs to approach their objectives from directions that Kronos' defenders had not anticipated or prepared to counter. Each infiltration mission required precise timing to ensure that the conductors would be positioned correctly for the coordinated assault while avoiding detection by the increasingly sophisticated security measures that Cronus had implemented around his stronghold. The Titan King's paranoia had led him to establish multiple layers of magical surveillance that monitored everything from seismic vibrations to changes in local weather patterns, making it necessary for Zeus's infiltrators to mask their activities through elaborate deception spells and environmental manipulation. The Hecatoncheira's role in the assault plan involved more than simple application of overwhelming force, as their unique capabilities made them ideal for executing complex tactical maneuvers that would exploit specific weaknesses in Mount Othrys's defensive systems. Cottus had identified vulnerable points in the fortress's structure where concentrated attacks could trigger cascading failures that would compromise entire defensive sectors. His multiple heads had analysed the architectural details visible from long-range observation, calculating the precise angles and force levels necessary to achieve maximum structural damage with minimum energy expenditure. Briareus had developed specialised projectiles designed to penetrate the adamantine reinforcements that protected Mount Othrys's most critical defensive positions. These projectiles incorporated materials that the Cyclops had created specifically for this purpose, including metals that could maintain their structural integrity while passing through magical barriers and explosive compounds that would detonate only after achieving predetermined penetration depths. His 100 arms could hurl these specialised weapons with mathematical precision while maintaining the rapid rate of fire necessary to overwhelm point defence systems. Gyges coordinated the intelligence gathering that provided real-time information about enemy movements and defensive preparations within Mount Othrys itself. His enhanced sensory capabilities allowed him to detect subtle changes in the fortress's energy patterns that indicated troop movements, weapons deployments, and other tactical adjustments that Cronus's commanders were making in response to the obvious preparations for major assault. This intelligence proved crucial for timing the attack to coincide with periods when enemy forces were positioned least advantageously for defensive operations. The magical preparations for the assault incorporated techniques and materials that had never before been combined for military purposes, creating weapons effects that challenged the fundamental laws governing divine combat. Métis had developed enhancement spells that could temporarily multiply the effectiveness of conventional weapons by factors that approached the theoretical limits of what the cosmic framework could support. These spells required enormous energy expenditures and could only be maintained for brief periods, making their timing critical to the overall success of the operation. The enhancement magic that Métis created worked by manipulating the relationship between physical force and divine essence, allowing conventional weapons to channel and focus divine power in ways that exceeded their normal capabilities. Arrows fired by Zeus's archers could penetrate defences that would normally deflect them, while sword strikes delivered by his infantry could cut through materials that should have been impervious to physical attack. The spell's temporary nature meant that their effects would fade rapidly, creating narrow windows of opportunity that required perfect coordination to exploit effectively. Hecate contributed curse-based weapons that could affect enemy morale and combat effectiveness on scales that encompassed entire military units rather than individual targets. Her curses were designed to create cascading psychological effects that would spread through enemy formations like contagious diseases, undermining unit cohesion and command authority at the precise moments when Kronos' forces would need maximum coordination to repel the assault. These psychological weapons required careful deployment to avoid affecting friendly forces operating in close proximity to their targets. The curse effects that Hecate designed targeted specific aspects of military psychology that were essential for effective defensive operations. Fear-based curses amplified natural anxiety about the battle's outcome until it became paralyzing terror that prevented rational decision-making. Confusion curses disrupted the mental processes necessary for following complex orders or coordinating with adjacent units. despair curses undermined the sense of purpose and loyalty that motivated soldiers to continue fighting despite adverse circumstances. The coordination of these diverse magical and physical attack elements required communication systems that could function reliably despite the electromagnetic interference and dimensional distortions that would inevitably result from the massive expenditure of divine power during the assault. Zeus's signal core developed a network of communication crystals that could maintain contact between different assault elements through resonance patterns that operated independently of normal space-time relationships. The communication crystals incorporated technology that the Cyclops had adapted from their experience with forging weapons that could channel divine essence across vast distances. Each crystal was tuned to specific harmonic frequencies that corresponded to the divine signatures of particular commanders, allowing for secure communication channels that enemy forces could not intercept or disrupt. The crystal network provided redundant communication paths that would remain functional even if individual nodes were destroyed during combat operations. The final assault began before dawn on a day when atmospheric conditions provided maximum concealment for the initial approach phases, while ensuring optimal visibility for the precision targeting that would be necessary during the main attack. Meteorological specialists among Zeus's forces had identified a weather pattern that would produce low-hanging clouds around Mount Othrys's lower slopes while maintaining clear skies at higher altitudes where the fortress's primary defensive positions were located. The approach march involved over 10,000 divine warriors moving in coordinated columns that converged on Mount Othrys from multiple directions simultaneously. Each column followed routes that had been carefully planned to avoid detection, while positioning the various assault elements to support each other during the critical initial phases of the attack. The movement required precise timing to ensure that all forces would reach their designated positions simultaneously despite travelling different distances over terrain of varying difficulty. Zeus himself led the central assault column, his divine presence serving both as inspiration for his followers and as a focal point for the magical energies that would power many of the specialized weapons being deployed. His thunderbolt crackled with contained lightning that illuminated the pre-dawn darkness, while his golden armor reflected the early morning light in ways that made him visible to his troops across the entire battlefield. The sight of their leader advancing confidently toward what many considered an impregnable fortress provided the psychological boost necessary to maintain morale during the dangerous approach phase. Poseidon commanded the Eastern Assault Force, which included the majority of the sea gods and water spirits, whose abilities would be crucial for exploiting the underground river systems that flowed beneath Mount Othrys. His trident generated localized earthquakes that created diversionary disturbances while his forces moved into position, making it difficult for enemy observers to distinguish between natural seismic activity and the vibrations created by troop movements. The eastern approach utilized a series of ravines and dry riverbeds that provided natural concealment while offering multiple routes for withdrawal if the assault encountered unexpected resistance. Hades led the Western Assault Force through terrain that his connection to underground realms made him uniquely qualified to navigate. His forces included earth elementals and cave-dwelling spirits whose knowledge of subterranean geography allowed them to approach Mount Othrys through tunnel systems that Cronus's defenders had not anticipated or prepared to monitor. The western approach required extensive underground movement that would have been impossible for conventional forces, but presented few difficulties for beings whose natural habitat included the deepest caves and most complex underground networks. The Hecatonchires advanced as a separate force that would coordinate their attacks with the main assault columns, while maintaining the flexibility necessary to respond to tactical developments that could not be anticipated during the planning phase. Their ability to operate independently while supporting the overall operation made them ideal for exploiting opportunities that might arise during the fluid conditions of major combat. Each of the three brothers carried communication crystals that would allow them to coordinate their actions with Zeus's overall tactical plan while adapting to local conditions as they developed. The initial bombardment began precisely at sunrise, when the combination of atmospheric conditions and tactical positioning provided maximum advantage for Zeus's forces, while minimizing the defensive benefits that Mount Othrys's elevation normally provided. Zeus's thunderbolts struck the fortress's outer defenses with unprecedented power, their electrical charges amplified by the conductor network that had been secretly installed during the preceding weeks. The lightning strikes created cascading electrical failures that disabled entire defensive systems, while illuminating the fortress's interior in brilliant flashes that revealed enemy positions to attacking forces. The lightning attacks achieved effects that exceeded even Zeus's optimistic projections for their effectiveness. The electrical charges channeled through Mount Othrys's mineral structure created feedback loops that amplified their destructive power while spreading the energy throughout the fortress's defensive network. Weapons that should have required direct hits to disable were knocked out by electrical surges that travelled through metal components and crystal focusing elements. Communication systems that Cronus's commanders depended on for coordinating defensive responses failed as their magical components overloaded from the electromagnetic interference generated by the sustained lightning bombardment. Simultaneously with Zeus's electrical assault, the Hekatonchires began their coordinated bombardment using the specialized projectiles that Briareus had developed for penetrating adamantine fortifications. Their 100 arms hurled these weapons with such rapid-fire precision that the fortress's point defense systems became overwhelmed within minutes of the attack's commencement. The projectiles' penetrating power allowed them to breach defensive walls that had been considered impervious, while their explosive payloads created internal damage that compromised structural integrity throughout entire sections of the fortress. The psychological impact of witnessing the Hekatonchires operating at maximum combat effectiveness proved as devastating to enemy morale as their physical attacks were to the fortress's defences. Kronos' soldiers, many of whom had never seen beings of such overwhelming power in action, found themselves paralysed by the spectacle of 100-armed giants hurling mountain-sized projectiles with perfect accuracy, while their 50 heads tracked multiple targets simultaneously. The sight challenged their understanding of what was possible in combat, creating doubt about their ability to defend against opponents whose capabilities exceeded the normal parameters of divine warfare. The coordinated ground assault began as soon as the initial bombardment had created sufficient breaches in Mount Othrys's outer defences to allow infantry forces to advance without facing concentrated defensive fire. Zeus's assault columns moved forward with disciplined precision, their advance covered by continuing artillery support from the Cyclops' lightning weapons and the Hekatonchires' projectile bombardment. The assault troops utilised specialised equipment designed for fortress warfare, including scaling ladders that could extend to impossible heights and siege engines that incorporated divine power sources for enhanced effectiveness. The breakthrough that decided the battle's outcome occurred when Cottus identified a critical structural weakness in Mount Othrys's central tower that had been created by the cumulative damage from the sustained bombardment. His multiple heads calculated the precise force and angle necessary to trigger a catastrophic structural failure that would bring down the entire defensive complex. The attack required perfect coordination between his 100 arms to deliver simultaneous strikes at multiple points, creating resonance effects that would amplify the damage beyond what individual impacts could achieve. The collapse of Mount Othrys's central tower created a domino effect that compromised defensive positions throughout the fortress complex. Walls that had been designed to support each other structurally became liability as the failure of key load-bearing elements created progressive collapses that spread rapidly through interconnected defensive systems. Within hours of Cottus's decisive strike, entire sections of the fortress had become uninhabitable, forcing Kronos' defenders to abandon positions that they had considered impregnable. The capture of Kronos himself occurred during the chaotic retreat that followed the fortress's structural collapse. The Titan King, separated from his bodyguards during the evacuation of his command center, found himself confronted by Zeus and his siblings in a courtyard where the rubble from collapsed buildings prevented effective escape. The confrontation between father and sons represented the culmination of conflicts that had been building since Zeus's liberation of his siblings, though the actual capture proceeded with surprising swiftness as Cronus's resistance crumbled in the face of overwhelming force. The binding of Kronos required the combined efforts of all 6 Olympian siblings, as the fallen Titan King retained sufficient power to pose a significant threat even in defeat. The chains that restrained him incorporated adamantine links that had been blessed by Styx water, creating bonds that could not be broken through physical force or magical manipulation. These restraints were designed not merely to prevent escape, but to suppress the divine powers that might allow Kronos to continue influencing cosmic events from imprisonment. The systematic capture of the remaining Titan commanders proceeded rapidly as Zeus's forces exploited the confusion and demoralization that followed their leader's defeat. Atlas, despite his formidable strength and tactical skill, found himself overwhelmed by coordinated attacks from multiple Olympian gods supported by Hecaton, Chires and Cyclopes, operating in perfect coordination. His capture required specialized restraints designed to contain beings of his enormous physical power, while his eventual punishment would reflect the crucial role he'd played in prolonging the conflict through his military expertise. Menoetius, who had commanded the fortress guarding Tartarus's entrance, was struck down by one of Zeus's thunderbolts during his attempt to rally the scattered remnants of Kronos's army for a final stand. His defeat eliminated the last organized resistance to Zeus's victory, while demonstrating the futility of continued opposition to the new cosmic order. The remaining Titan supporters either surrendered immediately or fled to remote regions where they hoped to avoid the consequences of their association with the defeated regime. The immediate aftermath of victory revealed the enormous scope of destruction that the final battle had inflicted on both Mount Othrys and the surrounding landscape. The fortress that had once been considered the most impregnable stronghold in creation lay in ruins, its adamantine walls reduced to rubble and its defensive systems permanently disabled by the electrical and seismic damage they had sustained. The mountain itself bore scars from the Hecaton Chires bombardment that would remain visible for geological ages, serving as permanent reminders of the conflict's intensity. The establishment of the new divine hierarchy began immediately as Zeus moved to consolidate his victory and prevent the power vacuum that might otherwise have led to continued instability. His first actions involved securing the loyalty of divine beings who had remained neutral during the conflict, offering them positions and responsibilities within the new order that recognized their value while ensuring their commitment to the changed cosmic structure. The distribution of authority among his siblings reflected both their contributions to the victory and their individual capabilities for governing specific aspects of creation. The victory at Mount Othrys marked the end of active hostilities, but Zeus understood that military triumph alone would not guarantee lasting stability for the new cosmic order he intended to establish. The immediate challenge involved processing thousands of captured Titans and their allies, while simultaneously reorganizing the fundamental structure of divine governance to prevent the cyclical conflicts that had characterized previous transitions of power. The young god's approach to these challenges would determine whether his revolution would create lasting peace or merely set the stage for future rebellions. The fate of the defeated Titans required careful consideration of both justice and practical security concerns. Unlike previous cosmic conflicts that had ended with the complete destruction or exile of the losing faction, Zeus recognized that many of the captured Titans possessed knowledge and abilities that could benefit the new order if properly channeled. However, the core leadership that had actively supported Kronos' tyrannical methods required punishment severe enough to deter future challenges while demonstrating the consequences of opposing divine justice. Cronus himself faced the most severe punishment, as his repeated infanticide and abuse of power had created crimes that demanded cosmic justice. The fallen Titan king was transported to Tartarus under heavy guard, his divine form bound with chains that incorporated materials from every level of creation to ensure absolute security. The adamantine links had been forged by the Cyclops specifically for this purpose, while Styxwater blessed each connection point to make the bonds unbreakable by any known force. The chains themselves were designed to grow stronger over time, feeding on Cronus's own divine essence to maintain their integrity throughout eternity. The descent to Tartarus required a procession that served both practical and symbolic purposes. Zeus personally led the convoy that transported his defeated father, accompanied by all 5 of his liberated siblings and the 3 Hecatonchires who would serve as permanent guardians. The journey through the layers of reality that separated the normal world from the primordial abyss took several days, during which Cronus remained conscious but silent, his golden complexion gradually fading as the chains drained his divine radiance. Tartarus itself had undergone significant changes since Zeus's earlier visits to liberate the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires. The primordial abyss had expanded to accommodate its growing population of cosmic prisoners, while its internal structure had evolved into distinct regions designed for different categories of containment. The deepest levels remained reserved for primordial threats that posed existential dangers to creation itself, while intermediate zones housed beings whose crimes were serious but not cosmic in scope. The prison constructed for Kronos occupied a specially prepared chamber that existed at the intersection of multiple dimensional planes, making escape impossible even for beings with reality manipulation abilities. The walls incorporated crystallized concepts of justice and punishment that would constantly remind the fallen Titan of his crimes while preventing any attempt to rationalize or minimize his actions. The chamber's design ensured that Cronus would remain conscious and aware throughout his imprisonment, experiencing the full weight of his punishment without the relief of unconsciousness or madness. Atlas received a punishment that reflected both his military skill and his decision to support Cronus, despite understanding the moral implications of that choice. Rather than simple imprisonment, Zeus assigned him the eternal task of supporting the celestial sphere that separated Earth from the heavens above. This punishment served multiple purposes. It utilized Atlas's tremendous strength for a cosmically necessary function, while ensuring that he could never again participate in military activities that might threaten divine order. The mechanism that bound Atlas to his eternal burden incorporated both physical and metaphysical elements that made his task genuinely necessary rather than merely symbolic. The weight of the celestial sphere required constant support from a being of Atlas's strength, while the position's isolation prevented him from communicating with potential allies or coordinating resistance activities. The punishment's design ensured that any attempt to abandon his post would result in cosmic catastrophe, making rebellion impossible without accepting responsibility for universal destruction. Menoetius, who had been struck down during the final battle, received posthumous punishment that reflected his role in maintaining the systems that had enabled Kronos' tyranny. His spirit was bound to serve as a guardian of Tartarus' outer defences, tasked with preventing unauthorized access to the abyss, while ensuring that no prisoner could escape through the dimensional barriers that separated the prison from normal reality. This assignment utilized his military expertise while ensuring his permanent separation from the cosmic community he had helped oppress. The Hecatonchires' assignment as Tartarus' primary guardians represented both a reward for their crucial role in Zeus's victory and a practical solution to the security challenges posed by housing such dangerous prisoners. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges established permanent residences within the abyss, their multiple heads and arms providing surveillance capabilities that could monitor every aspect of the prison complex simultaneously. Their presence made escape attempts futile, while their loyalty to Zeus ensured that the new cosmic order would never face the threat of these particular prisoners regaining their freedom. The three brothers adapted to their new role with enthusiasm that reflected their understanding of its cosmic importance. Cronus developed surveillance systems that utilized his multiple consciousness centers to maintain awareness of prisoner activities across vast areas of the prison complex. Briareus constructed additional security measures that incorporated his engineering expertise with materials available within Tartarus itself. Gyges established communication protocols that allowed the Guardians to coordinate with Zeus's government while maintaining the isolation necessary for effective prison security. The division of cosmic authority among Zeus and his siblings required careful negotiation to ensure that each received responsibilities appropriate to their abilities while maintaining the unity that had made their victory possible. The allocation process reflected both practical considerations about divine governance and the personal relationships that had developed during their shared imprisonment and subsequent liberation. Zeus's position as overall ruler was acknowledged by his siblings, but his authority would be exercised through consultation and cooperation, rather than the autocratic methods that had characterized previous cosmic rulers. Zeus assumed dominion over the sky and the atmospheric phenomena that connected Earth with the celestial realm. His control encompassed weather patterns, lightning, thunder, and the movement of clouds that brought rain to nourish the Earth below. This domain provided him with the visibility and authority necessary for his role as king of the gods, while allowing him to maintain the cosmic balance that regulated seasonal cycles and agricultural productivity. His thunderbolt remained his primary symbol of authority, though its use would be guided by principles of justice rather than mere power. The establishment of Zeus's celestial palace on Mount Olympus created a new center of cosmic governance that reflected the changed principles underlying divine rule. Unlike Cronus's fortress-like stronghold, Zeus's residence emphasized openness and accessibility, with great halls where petitioners could seek justice and council chambers where important decisions could be debated among the divine community. The architecture incorporated elements that symbolized the new order's commitment to fairness and consultation, while defensive measures remained subtle rather than intimidating. Poseidon received authority over the seas, earthquakes, and the underground waters that connected different regions of the Earth. His domain encompassed not only the visible oceans, but also the hidden currents that flowed through subterranean channels and the seismic forces that shaped the planet's geological structure. This assignment recognized his affinity for aquatic environments, while providing him with responsibilities that were crucial for maintaining the Earth's physical stability and supporting the maritime activities that connected different civilizations. The establishment of Poseidon's underwater palace created a new center of power that complemented rather than competed with Zeus's celestial authority. The palace's construction utilized materials and techniques that were unique to the marine environment, including coral formations that had been shaped by divine power and metals that had been refined in underwater volcanic vents. The structure served as both a residence and a command center from which Poseidon could monitor oceanic conditions and coordinate responses to natural disasters that threatened coastal populations. Hades received dominion over the underworld and the realm of the dead, a responsibility that reflected both his solemn temperament and his understanding of the hidden aspects of existence that remained invisible to most divine beings. His authority encompassed not only the judgment and processing of deceased souls, but also the vast mineral wealth that lay buried within the Earth's depths. This domain provided him with resources and responsibilities that were essential for cosmic function, while maintaining his preference for operating away from the public attention that characterized his brothers' roles. The establishment of Hades' underworld kingdom required extensive construction projects that created a realm capable of accommodating the souls of all mortal beings, while maintaining the order necessary for proper judgment and afterlife assignment. The kingdom's geography included regions designed for different categories of souls, from the punishment areas reserved for the wicked to the pleasant meadows where the virtuous could enjoy eternal peace. The construction incorporated both practical considerations about population management and philosophical principles about justice and moral accountability. Hera assumed authority over marriage, family relationships, and the protection of women, responsibilities that reflected her natural inclinations towards social order and domestic harmony. Her domain encompassed the legal and religious frameworks that governed family formation, while extending to the broader social structures that supported community stability. This assignment provided her with influence over aspects of mortal and divine society that were crucial for maintaining the peaceful conditions necessary for civilization to flourish. Demeter received responsibility for agriculture, the harvest, and the fertility of the earth that supported all living creatures. Her domain included not only the cultivation of crops, but also the natural cycles of growth and renewal that governed plant and animal reproduction. This assignment recognized her connection to the Earth's productive capacity, while ensuring that the abundance characteristic of the Golden Age would continue under the new cosmic order, though now regulated by principles of seasonal variation, rather than constant plenty. Hestia assumed guardianship of the hearthfire that made homes sacred and communities possible. Her responsibilities encompassed the domestic spaces where families gathered and the public buildings where communities conducted their collective business. This domain provided her with influence over the social bonds that held civilizations together, while reflecting her preference for stability and continuity over dramatic change or expansion. The establishment of the Olympian pantheon as the new governing body of creation required the development of administrative systems that could manage cosmic affairs more effectively than the autocratic methods employed by previous rulers. Zeus instituted regular councils where major decisions could be debated among the 12 principal Olympian gods, with voting procedures that ensured minority viewpoints could be heard while maintaining the efficiency necessary for effective governance. These councils addressed everything from the management of natural phenomena to the resolution of disputes between different divine factions. The integration of former enemies into the new cosmic order presented ongoing challenges that required careful diplomacy and gradual trust-building measures. Many Titans who had supported Cronus out of family loyalty rather than conviction gradually accepted positions within Zeus's government, their expertise in various aspects of cosmic management proving valuable for maintaining the complex systems that regulated natural phenomena. Oceanus, whose neutrality during the war had preserved his credibility with both sides, assumed responsibility for coordinating water management across different divine jurisdictions. Themis, whose support for Zeus had provided moral legitimacy for the rebellion, became the primary architect of the legal frameworks that would govern divine society under the new order. Her understanding of natural law and proper custom enabled her to design systems of justice that balanced the need for order with respect for individual rights and freedoms. The legal codes she developed addressed everything from property disputes between gods to the proper procedures for resolving conflicts between different cosmic domains. Prometheus received recognition for his crucial role in Zeus's victory through appointment to positions that utilized his prophetic abilities and strategic intelligence for the benefit of the new order. His responsibilities included monitoring potential threats to cosmic stability, while advising on policy decisions that required understanding of long-term consequences. However, his relationship with Zeus would later become complicated by disagreements over the proper treatment of humanity, leading to conflicts that demonstrated the ongoing challenges of managing a diverse coalition of divine personalities. The impact of the Titanomachy on mortal humanity became apparent through gradual changes in their living conditions and relationship with the divine realm. The end of the Golden Age's automatic abundance required humans to develop agricultural techniques and technological innovations that would allow them to maintain their civilization through their own efforts rather than divine beneficence. This transition, while challenging, ultimately proved beneficial by encouraging the development of skills and knowledge that made human society more resilient and self-sufficient. The establishment of regular communication between gods and mortals through oracles, sacrifices, and religious festivals created new opportunities for divine guidance, while maintaining appropriate boundaries between the cosmic and terrestrial realms. Zeus instituted systems that allowed humans to seek divine assistance during crises, while encouraging them to develop their own capabilities for solving routine problems. This approach fostered human development while preventing the dependency that had characterized earlier divine-mortal relationships. The religious thought that emerged from the Titanomachy's legacy emphasized themes that would influence spiritual and philosophical development for millennia. The conflict's demonstration that even the most powerful rulers could be overthrown for injustice provided a foundation for concepts of divine accountability and moral law that transcended mere power relationships. The victory of younger gods over their elders established precedents for generational renewal and the importance of adapting to changing circumstances rather than clinging to outdated methods. The theme of order triumphing over chaos became central to religious and philosophical systems that developed in the war's aftermath. The Titanomachy demonstrated that cosmic stability required constant vigilance and active maintenance rather than passive acceptance of existing conditions. This understanding encouraged both divine and mortal communities to take responsibility for maintaining justice and preventing the accumulation of grievances that could lead to revolutionary upheavals. The concept of divine justice that emerged from Zeus's victory emphasized the importance of moral behavior and the inevitability of consequences for actions that violated natural law. Unlike the arbitrary punishments that had characterized earlier cosmic rulers, the new order's approach to justice emphasized proportionality and the possibility of redemption for those who acknowledged their errors and worked to make amends. This development provided a foundation for ethical systems that balanced accountability with compassion. The generational conflict that had driven the Titanomachy established patterns that would influence divine and mortal societies throughout subsequent history. The war demonstrated that progress often required challenging established authority, while simultaneously showing the importance of maintaining valuable traditions and knowledge from previous generations. This balance between innovation and continuity became a central theme in the governance systems that Zeus established. The Titanomachy's conclusion marked the end of the cosmic conflicts that had characterized the early universe and the beginning of a more stable period in which divine and mortal civilizations could develop without the constant threat of revolutionary upheaval. Zeus's success in establishing a lasting cosmic order that balanced power with justice, innovation with tradition, and divine authority with moral accountability created the foundation for the classical age of mythology and the religious systems that would guide human civilization for thousands of years. The war's legacy extended beyond its immediate participants to influence the entire structure of cosmic governance and the relationship between power and responsibility that would characterize divine rule throughout the ages that followed. The principles established during Zeus's victory would be tested by future challenges, but the fundamental framework of justice, consultation, and moral accountability that emerged from the Titanomachy provided the foundation for a cosmic order that proved capable of adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining its essential character and values.